Hey everybody, it's Alex. Real quick here, just inserting myself right into the video before things get a little crazy. Uh, there are some audio issues with this discussion, unfortunately, which means I'm just going to be putting it out as the video is not going to be an audio version, which we kind of talked about a little bit on the show, but just video. Audio people out there will know noise gate was set a little too high, which means it just kept cutting me out frequently. I don't know why this happened. I have gone back and tried to adjust settings, but I haven't been able to recreate the issue. But it just means basically I'm cutting in and out, not all the time, but pretty frequently throughout the entire discussion, all the way to the end. Yes, I know it's terrible. I put out a poll on Twitter, just kind of letting folks know that this was going on, and if I asked if I should release the video still. It did turn out to be like a really great discussion, and Barrett's audio is totally fine. And people voted that, hey, yeah, just put it out. That will deal with it. So I'm putting a little disclosure up front. That's what's going on. I know it sucks. I've listened to it back. I know it's terrible. I know, like, I'm just talking in a sentence and then I just cut out and you just see me, gesticulating and whatnot. And then I come back eventually. Sometimes you can't hear me at all. It's a bummer. I'm very pissed about it. Don't get me wrong, but it was such a good discussion, and I love having Barrett on, and him and I's talks are always very long, but very thought out and great, so I wanted to put it out anyway. So apologies for the audio issues. I hope you still find some enjoyment in it, and remember, at the very least, the most important thing, Barrett's there. You can hear him and all his great and wonderful and well thought out opinions about God of War Ragnarok. So keep that in mind. Apologies again. I hope you enjoy it nonetheless. And bye. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another review discussion. I am Alex O'Neill, joined this time by a very special guest, Barrett Courtney.
Hello, how you doing?
Good. I was going to call you the boss baby, but I never know if you like that or don't like that.
It's one of those things, like, we're almost 4 years into my time here at Kinda Funny. Hi, I'm Barrett Courtney, if you don't know. I'm a director of I direct video content over at Kinda Funny. And yeah, that name just kind of stuck. I don't know where. I think it was Andy early on at my time at Kinda Funny who was just like, you kind of look like Boss Baby, and it's just I can't get away from it anymore. So I feel like I kind of have to embrace it. If you don't know, we launched a new studio a little over a month ago, and for my walk-in introduction, you saw a video wall with some My Hero Academia on the background, playing some Persona music, stuff that a lot of people associate me with. And the name on the wall was Boss Baby, and I will say props to Tim. He was like, hey, is it cool if we do Boss Baby, or do you want something else? And I was like, we might as well just do Boss Baby. I was trying to get CEO Junior to stick, and it does a little bit, but then I realized, I think, like 6 months after Greg started calling me CEO Junior, that CEO Junior was just another way to call me Boss Baby, and I was like, I just can't escape this name. So, that's yeah, just got to lean into it now.
Sure. I often refer to people as sweet baby boy. So
that's true. I do. Yes, I do know that of you.
But so, like, I don't know where that like years into Boss Baby, but
yeah, I'm your sweet Boss Baby boy.
Yeah, exactly. Sweet Boss Baby. Mine in particular.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, the last time we were talking about before we started recording, last time we really like the thing talking about Persona 5 Roy. My favorite game. Now we're talking about God of War. Yeah. I didn't know where it was on the list.
Oh yeah.
And now we're talking about God of War, the sequel to one of your favorite games.
Yes. 2018.
2018's God of War versus 2022's God of War Ragnarok. I thought it was 5.
I know.
I think in my head I was just already delayed. Very long time.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were, and it was one of those things where it was originally announced, right, for the PlayStation 5 reveal, and gosh, that was back in, what was that, 2020? and then they were like, "Oh, it's going to come 2021," and then that obviously never hit. And I think a lot of us in our head were, because it got delayed like out an entire year, we're like, "Man, it's just so far away." And even though it's already out, we still kind of think of it in our head as like, "Oh, this is such it's such a big thing that there's no way that it's already out yet. It's still so far away, you know."
Yeah, I will say on the record so people know the
Hmm.
relationship. I mean, I am a known God of War 2018 critique. I wouldn't.
Yeah, I was gonna I couldn't remember if you were aired on the side of enjoying it more, or if you were one of the more who were kind of down on that, because I feel like in the last like couple of years, people have like really kind of reflected back on their time with 2018, and really talk more about the complexities of their feelings with that game.
Yeah, and I think part of it is poison that can be diced,
Yeah.
and just like being around it, and either it's the greatest game ever made or it's not, and that's a problem for people, and there's no in between, right?
Absolutely none.
And I was really, really excited for God of War 2018, and I think it just didn't hit the really wanted it to. And I especially had a lot of issue how Freya was treated toward the end of the game and how that writing felt really bad. And I didn't feel like Atreus kind of came known in that game. And I also, but like my big takeaway was really liked what they did with Kratos, really
Hmm.
liked Christopher Judge's on the character. And I wasn't expecting, like, that's what I wanted more than anything, but I wasn't really expecting to actually be like, oh, like, I really like this character now.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and that's coming from me, like, when I was younger, I didn't really play the God of War pre, but I watched my
Right.
brother play them because I loved, I probably shouldn't have. I'll let everybody know on the record. Probably should not have. But I love Greek mythology, so I was kind of like obsessed with this interesting at the time, very different on Greek mythology.
Hmm.
This kind of more realistic, you could say, or
Yeah.
modernistic take. And so like there are parts of it that I really loved, and I don't necessarily have the same relationship with Norse mythology.
Hmm.
But the way that they in interact very interesting. Now, you were one of those people that God of War 20 coming out of it. How did
Yeah.
you feel about it after?
Yeah, so for the anticipation of Ragnarok, I actually went back and uh, similar but not similar in a way. God of War was always kind of around me since it had come out back in 2005. A lot of my bro friends back in Ohio were really into God of War, and I just remember always seeing like those covers and being like, "This ain't for me." Like, y'all, this is cool for you, but I really just don't care. But I was always aware of those games, and yeah, just never played them. And then got interested in the reveal for 2018, right? Where you see Atreus playing outside the shack, and then Kratos comes out, and now a bearded man, and all that stuff. And seeing all that, I was like, oh, this seems much more interesting to me. And also, that was revealed at a time where I was getting much more interested in, the PlayStation first party studio like type of video game, that like kind of big blockbustery type of thing. And so yeah, for anticipation for Ragnarok, I played through almost the entire series this year, every game except for Ascension, and that's purely because I asked God of War experts. I was like, hey, what games do I really need to play to like really get to the core of who Kratos is as like a character? And they're like, everything, but you can skip Ascension. And I was like, all right, cool. So yeah, I played through all of that to kind of like really understand where Kratos started off and where he's gone through throughout the entire thing, and then also replayed 2018, and then made a video kind of about my interpretation, my takeaways from that, which you can check out on youtube.com. So that's kind of funny games. It's called oh man, what is it called? It's called Can Kratos Change, or Can Kratos Be Better? Kind of funny recap and retrospective of the God of War franchise. And Honestly, like playing 2018 after or after playing those games for the very first time, I loved it more, which I was kind of surprised by, and that's why I love replaying video games, just to see like what my interpretations and takeaways of pieces of art are versus when I first experienced them. Right, you know, the kind of joke that's always told at Kind of Funny is like, oh, Barrett just likes to replay everything. He just plays Persona 5 over and over and over again. It's like, but I always think of the thing from Breaking Bad where they go to the art installation where they just look at a bunch of different doors that were painted over and over again. It's like it's a different takeaway for different people, just because it's the same piece of media technically. There's something you can take away from it at a different time in your life. So, yeah, going into replaying 2018, I was surprised of like how much more in depth I felt like they had gone with Kratos, and kind of seeing that full kind of context with it as well, of seeing just how little Kratos had actually changed, and kind of seeing the little steps that he does take near the end of 2018 to do that. And I do see where a lot of people do come from, of kind of the shortcomings with other characters, like Atreus, like Freya, and stuff like that. And my kind of my thing always with that was I thought back to, you know, when Corey Barlog was doing his kind of rounds of interviews when 2018 was coming out, and he was doing spoiler casts for every site, essentially, and he talked about like they started writing the second game is almost essentially when they were in the middle of writing the first game, where they had to like kind of stop themselves and be like, oh wait, this is stuff that we need to kind of save for later. And so that's always where I felt like, you know, their story's unfinished. So I want to wait before judging on like where these characters end up. And I always liked I never saw Freya as like a villain, of like being made out as a villain near the end of that game. I always felt like that was more on Kratos and Atreus, and her kind of lashing back at them is on them. And I kind of like where, you know, they follow up with it, on it in Ragnarok, because it feels more like a completed arc for her. And same with Atreus, right? I think they did a good amount of groundwork for him, for the first game, to have him come into his own in Ragnarok. A lot of stuff there that I love. And yeah, it's a fun game to play. It's a slower game that I'm not usually super into, of just like the kind of the weight that Kratos kind of feels and plays as. But I don't know, there's something methodical about it that I really enjoy. And you know, people, you know, for 2018 talk about enemy variety not being super interesting and stuff like that, and it's like, I don't care, that axe just feels super fun to play with, and
Yeah.
along with the chains and stuff like that. And I just also love the lore and stuff like that. It was 2018 that got me into more like Norse mythology, and actually like reading up on it and learning about it more so than, you know, any of the Marvel Thor stuff and stuff like that, where I was really looking into the stories and interpretations, and how Kratos' presence changed a lot of things, and looking into the differences. And that's kind of like what got me into that mythology. Whereas you, with the original God of War games, for you were already into Greek mythology and wasn't necessarily into Norse mythology with going into 2018, and I was the same. But yeah, that was the game where I was like, all right, I need to learn everything I can about this, because it's fascinating, like what they're doing here.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was surprised to kind of find myself loving that game even more so than I remember back in 2018.
Was the best.
Yeah.
You put in the work for a franchise like that.
Hmm.
Now I even like.
Yeah, and it was also really sad. On the most recent playthrough, I also got the platinum finally for 2018. So there's so
Nice.
much of that. Yeah, and there's so much of that area, like the in Midgard, that I had not explored. I was like, all kind of new to me. Like 4 years later, I was like, holy shit, this is a lot of cool stuff here. So yeah, that was also kind of bonus on top of that journey as well.
Yeah, this is we're gonna have interesting. Since Ragnarok,
Mm,
and we don't have to get into the minutia of me
okay.
sicko, but I have, since Ragnarok came out, played God of War Ascension 3.
Okay.
So I did play God of War Ascension. Here to tell you,
I hear like the game. If you're into that gameplay, it's a fun time. It's more of like kind of that God of War 3 era of just like hack and slash combo kind of stuff. But yeah, for like lore and story stuff, I heard that they kind of lost the plot on that one. So I was like,
Yeah.
all right, yeah.
Yeah, I had also never like I'd watched my brother play God of War 1. I played God of War 3. But I had never played any of them myself, and I had certainly never played Chains of Olympus or Ghost of Sparta or Ascension.
Those first two, I absolutely worth it.
Yeah, and they are
Yeah,
totally.
yeah.
I really liked, especially Ghost of Sparta, which will come up frequently in conversation. But I like those two honestly, maybe the most because they are in a day.
Oh yeah.
It's
yeah.
what a great gift that is, right? So yeah, I similarly I have kind of Kratos, and I played God of War 2018 for the second time, 2021 last year.
Okay. And then how did you, so as one of the people who's more critical of 2018, how did you find yourself when you went back to that last year?
It's funny, when I went back to it then, I liked it more, not because there were certain aspects that I liked more, but because I didn't, I think, and I kind of felt when I played it then that the game takes its
Gotcha.
maybe fair, maybe not, but now my opinion has certainly changed. I don't know if I'm gonna come around on 20
As a whole.
as a whole,
Yeah.
right? But I love God of War Ragnarok.
Mhm.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
And it really hit all the notes that I wanted it to hit. Not like doing what I wanted it to,
Mhm.
certainly subverted my expectations in a lot of great ways, but it gave me the things that I think I needed to satisfy story for me.
Right.
Where lacking in that. And
Mhm.
it took everything that I didn't like about 20 and made it something that which I thought was really impressive. And that's
Yeah.
not an easy thing.
Yeah. And it's one of those interesting things too where it's hard for me to talk about 2018 as its own game now. I think more so I think we talked about this on kind of funny content where it's like the Last of Us Part 1 going to The Last of Us Part 2, right? They feel like two very distinct games because of obviously the time in between those releases, the upgrades and the fidelity and gameplay feel and all that stuff. And it's one of those things where also Last of Us Part 1 ends and it could have just ended there, right? And even when you look like even playing Part 2 and like looking at that story and like looking back at part one still feels like its own story, right? Where God of War feels like the opposite, where it's hard for me to talk about 2018 as its own game now because it just feels like the first act in a bigger game,
Yeah.
whereas Ragnarok is acts 2 and 3 put together. It's to me it's looking at the Star Wars original trilogy as one whole story rather than three separate movies or something like that, right? And so yeah, that's like the weird thing looking back at 2018 as another wrinkle to it, right? Where it's just one slice of the pie now.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up The Last of Us because I was going to as well.
Mm.
Because this to me feels way more like a part one, part two of the story than
Yes.
Last of Us, which isn't to say Last of Us doesn't feel like. I
Hmm.
think it lends itself to part two, Last of Us part two. Is part two because it happened. That is
Hmm.
why the same could be said here, and because there is so much foreshadowing in God of War 2018,
Hmm.
in God of War Ragnarok, it's tough to separate those events head. But there's definitely a delineation line for me of where things improve.
Hmm.
And I think it is definitely around that first 5-ish hour mark of God of War Ragnarok where we kind of get a perspective change and
Hmm.
talk about a little first part for folks listening. Fully spoiler free. take off our spoiler hats and
Mhm.
start going nuts as we go through. But if you're worried about that ahead of time, put that up. Won't be spoiling anything. Marked point.
Yeah, we'll let you know. Don't worry.
And it's in the timestamp. So if you want to just get to that. But yeah, I really loved Ragnarok. I really liked how it utilized its story, its characters, and like I in my heart of hearts, like Ragnarok is like 10 out of 10. I want 2018, but I
Mm.
understand and I appreciate 2018 retroactively because
Uh-huh.
of one of my big criticisms with 2018. I don't know what I don't
Right.
know how I'm supposed to feel about him. I don't know even what his kind of like static character traits are supposed to be, and a lot of people kind of brush that off and was like, he's a kid, he's whatever, like, you know, that's how kids are. I'm like, I don't care because I'm not enjoying this from a storytelling perspective.
Yeah.
But teenage Atreus, and of course,
Mhm.
teenage speaks to me, lover of teen, is like exactly the vibe that I wanted and I didn't know I
Mhm.
wanted, of like that doing teenager like having a crush or uh, running away from home or like these things that teens do. They made it
Accidentally causing chaos, stuff like
exactly.
that.
Yeah.
And it like just not on purpose, just like doing weird teenage stuff, and you're just figuring out life,
Yeah.
on your own and like learning who you are. And that's another retroactive thing that I kind of love a little bit more about 2018 is the fact that he doesn't have a lot going on for him as a character, and that's because like his story is just a faster paced version of what Kratos went through. It's like when he learns that he's a god, right? Or he thinks he's the big shit. He thinks he's more important than everything else, and then he gets very humbled near the end of that game, and that's kind of just like all right, we need him to go through Kratos' journey, but not nearly as intense and way more quickly. So for the rest of his journey, once we get to Ragnarok and like he gets to the point of self discovery and actually becoming a character, we don't have to do that shit again,
Yeah.
And I love that. That's something that again, speaking in more vague terms, I love that Atreus's journey in Ragnarok feels like his own and not his dad's. And
Yeah.
that's kind of that speaks to the core of the game, right? It's the awkward time between a child and parent where the child is not the parent anymore. They're finding their own DNA to become their own person and their own adult, and it's that hard kind of a balance for both of them to learn of like, all right, where do we let go, where do we go our own, like where do we shake hands on like, all right, this is who we are as people, and we can still, be in each other's lives and stuff like that. But the child is not just what the parent makes of them, right?
Yeah. And I like that they do all these things and hit on all these notes and vibe.
Hmm.
But god damn it, is it a real thing? And if you play video games, you know they have a vibe. The
Hmm.
vibe of teen Atreus does not feel tropey or rote, and it does feel organic
Hmm.
in a way that doesn't like that teen drama.
It doesn't feel like 40-year-old adults who have never spoken to a teenager wrote a teenager role.
Yes.
It feels very genuine. It it feels like they actually reflected back on like what it was like for them growing up, things that any generation of kid growing up like goes through and what they feel, and the motions that they go through, and the relationships that they make. And I love all of those different aspects for Atreus, right? Of not just seeing his relationship just with Kratos, which is the majority of 2018. You get a little bit of like the small cast of characters that you get in 2018, but I love just like how much more you get built with just like even just like Atreus and Sindri and stuff like that. Whereas like Sindri feels like cool uncle for a little bit for Atreus, and Mimir is like the second dad for Atreus, and Brock is kind of like the cool drunk uncle that
The
maybe
other
is kind of
uncle that's
cool. The
that's
other,
probably giving him alcohol under the table. Yeah,
yeah,
totally.
exactly.
Yeah, totally.
Oh man.
Yeah, and I think that's like such a hard thing to do. Like,
Hmm.
Persona 5 is about teens, but certainly doesn't feel or act like it in a lot of times, and that's okay for what that game is. But
Hmm.
like, I think trying to be like a teenager and make that angst sexual and also coerce with like the stakes that they're putting on the table in this whole game
Hmm.
is really difficult, and I think they do.
Yeah.
And I that was like a thing coming into this that like I just did not care about Atreus, and then out of this Atreus, I'm not gonna say I fell in love with him. He's characters or anything. I
Hmm.
wouldn't go that far, but I think is really interesting and good and well. And honestly, that's all you
Yeah.
with a teenager.
Yeah.
Whatever gets the job done. Uh,
Exactly.
but also like on a gameplay level, I think a lot of that slowness that I think wore out its welcome to some extent in God of War 28. They
Hmm.
changed like just the right amount of things. Like don't have to climb as many things. Like use the chains to grapple up
Yeah.
platform. Just so much faster. Reyes,
Yeah.
he's doing it all on his own. You don't have to worry about him. So like that's not gonna slow you
Yeah,
down.
he doesn't have to climb on your back anymore. I love that. There's even that little moment of like, he's gotten pretty good at climbing,
Yeah.
like and yeah, I imagine that must have had to have been like a when they were talking about level design, not even just like exploration, but in combat arenas of like how do we there's been the kind of comparison a lot to Doom Eternal with this game of just like how they lay out enemy arenas and stuff like that. And I imagine like to kind of even though it's a little more slower and methodical, there's still a momentum to it. And how do you keep that momentum and the being able to like chain up somewhere to then continue fighting somewhere else and then them being like, well, that should just be how we climb places. It's like, oh yeah, that's a fantastic decision.
Yeah, and the combat arenas in this game, there was definitely a point like at the halfway point where I was like, man, I really like that two stories to like every arena, and I
Yeah.
usually the guy that's like up on the second floor that's throwing garbage at you, like I can actually get up to him now and just beat his
Yeah.
ass.
I don't have to just like throw the
Yeah,
axe
just like
a couple of times.
couple of good
Like
times.
save him for the last enemy, and then you're just kind of like standing there trading like
Yeah,
projectiles, and it's like, all right, whatever.
yeah. This like, and there's definitely just like that frenetic nature of jumping up, coming down, and then like the death from above attacks where you can jump
Yes.
down and do an attack that like will launch enemies. It works so well with all the other things that they're doing. More varied ranged enemies, more varied heavy enemies, more
Hmm.
varied enemies in general, and a lot more status effects that you have to worry about. Like a lot
Yeah.
more mechanics going on in combat, but like 2018 still had the same arenas that God of War 3 had, which is like
Hmm.
circular or rectangular platform that dudes just come to.
Yeah.
Whereas this, you're jumping up around. You sometimes have 3 layers
Hmm.
that like makes range attacks way more fun to using environmental hazards. There's like so much more you can in a combat encounter here that just
Yeah. 100%.
yeah. But yeah, that just having the chains for traversal was like a big deal.
I know. That was one where I was like, man, I can't believe they didn't think about this earlier. This is such like an ingenious, like just little thing that they added that feels so good. And yeah, with yeah, Atreus taking care of himself in that similar situation. It's just like, oh yeah, this is nice.
Yeah, arrow hook shot doesn't need.
I know. It's so cool to see him like do that as well. You're like, oh, you're kind of taking it. You're learning like the lessons that your dad's learning. You're kind of like using it for your own as well. That's cool.
Yeah. Now, a thing I know people have brought up,
Mm.
and I'm sure we'll revisit, is the pacing. There's only like one part in the thought was Um,
Interesting. Okay.
and there's not necessarily, I know, like, there's definitely a specific story beat that happens in the
Hmm.
back half of the game about that people probably feel is a little rushed, that honestly worked for me.
Hmm.
But how did you feel about that?
It was it's one of those things where, I play it my first I played through it twice. First playthrough is just more natural, was looking to beat it before review embargo. And just for context, right, that first playthrough was roughly 27 hours with like a lot of like the earlier side quests done, but then like once you're getting later into the game, it was less like the embargo pressure and more of just like the story just got more and more and more engaging and interesting, where you're just like, all right, I know, like, they're telling me like, hey, I would love to just like hang out in Midgard for a little bit and just like hang out with each other, and we can go do side quests before we do the main story beat. And I'm like, nah, man, the story's interesting as hell. I'm sorry that we want to like have like personal one-on-one time, but we're doing the next story beat, you know? So yeah, so that's and then I did a second playthrough to capture footage for the Kind of Funny spoiler cast, and that took me like 22 hours. And it was interesting, like on that first playthrough, because it's a lot of taking things in for the first time. So when you're taking in a story for the first time, it's hard to see you literally can't see the full picture yet. So it's just like a lot being just thrown at you into your face, and Ragnarok really does feel like that the first time you're taking that story in. There's a lot that happens, and there's just like points where you're like, oh my god, we're going to this place next. We're going to talk to this Norse character. We're going to do this and this, but I think we still need to like get here. I don't know how they're going to do that. Am I in the last 4 hours of the game? I don't know, and it did at one point feel like almost a little too much of your favorite dessert for me a little bit. Where it's like, oh my gosh, there's just so much here. Um, where I didn't know how I felt about it really leaving it. I know I really loved it, but there's like on that first playthrough, I was like, man, I have maybe gripes here, maybe gripes there. And then on the second playthrough, being able to understand and know the full picture, I think that's when I kind of fully appreciated of like, no, I feel like a lot of this is necessary and a lot of this is paid off, whether it is in a main story beat or in a random like conversation while walking around talking to Mimir or something like that on a side quest. And yeah, I on the second playthrough, I didn't mind the pacing as much, with all the stuff that's being thrown into your face, plot wise, and just story, like emotional, on the emotional side of things as well. There is one point where I was like, I felt there's one point near the end of the game where there's a section where I was like, man, if this was in 2018, this would have been its own like hour and a half sequence, and it feels so quick, and you're just like, oh wow, this moment with this character feels so like, all right, like it felt like, we kind of need to get this done, but again, because there's so much else that's going on, it feels just like all right, like whatever, it had to get done because it's part of the plot, um but it didn't take away the big important emotional stuff that happens with the main characters and stuff like that. So on the second playthrough, I did not mind the pacing whatsoever.
Yeah, I think it's overall pretty good, especially like the volume of content,
Right.
of themes that need to be talked about. Oh, is very impressive. I think the way that they thread the needle is very well done. It doesn't feel fillery, like
Hmm.
there's not like
Yeah, no.
not a part of the arc that feels like, okay, we could have just cut
Yeah, we could have cut this. Yeah, no, exactly. Pardon me. And I think I know the section that a lot of people are kind of torn on like whether it's slow or whatever. And I will say, again, talking in vaguities here of this certain section that you go to, on the second playthrough, I was like, man, this area wasn't actually as long as I remember it being on the first playthrough. I think it just feels slow because it's a breather.
yeah.
It's the first breather that I feel like you really have in the game, where a lot of plot is being thrown at you, where like there's a certain section where you're like, oh man, now's the time for characters to kind of reflect and kind of walk away from the plot heavy stuff to really think inwardly that is necessary for to get through the rest of the game to when you're in the beginning of the third act, all of that stuff that's built up is worth it. And so yeah, I never felt like or especially on that second playthrough, I didn't think the the pacing felt off and slowness especially.
Yeah. There are two things that I would like to talk about before
Mm,
into Killers are fair game. But these are
okay.
things that I think could be considered stuff that you might not before
Right.
playing the game.
Mm,
So
mm,
I'm going to establish that as a very gray area for people listening.
yeah.
Uh, those two things that I want to talk about in it now, like to leave by, are a playing as Atreus, large chunks of the
Mm,
game. And B, having Freya as a kind of secondary companion after some of her story happened. Um,
mhm.
First thing, obviously, the Atreus moment, and this was like kind of plays into another one of my things that I just ultimately didn't love about 20. But then the way it was used in Ragnarok really brought me back around to it, and that was the whole one shot thing.
Yeah.
Um, I know you're a big fan of Birdman,
Oh yeah. I
so
love a one shot.
I know you love a one. I thought it was fine in 2018. I honestly could have lived without it. Was my thing. Like I didn't feel like it was per se. Like obviously you get to see with the dragon,
Yeah,
where
I
Balder.
think there are some scenes that like it definitely enhances scenes, but like as they don't play around with it in fun ways
Yeah,
like they do in Ragnarok, where it's again we won't get into those specifics until we hit there, but yeah, the way they play around with it, especially when we talk about the first Atreus section,
yeah. When
right?
it
And I love
transitions to him, like I'm like,
yeah.
okay, now you're getting me on board. And then like we get some great dream sequence,
Hmm.
like this great knife transition that happens like at the point of the game.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, that was pretty fucking.
Yeah.
And the way that like the camera just stays with other characters
Hmm.
just in general, like
Yeah.
you got a couple of good scenes with Atreus first in 2018, but it was really mostly Kratos intentionally, or like to really kind of sit with that character. But here, like some great moments where like we are just with like Freya for a long time, like
Right.
she's the character right now. Like it's like okay, this feels like it's important to have this single shot because it is like connecting these
Hmm.
very fluid personal moments. But then like you get like a moment we'll talk about in a little bit with Sindri that is kind
Yes.
of comical, but it's like just incredible from like a
Hmm.
lore perspective and stuff like that. But yeah, like they use it, I think, best when transitioning Kratos to
Yep.
Atreus section. So that first time that happens, which was a thing I thought was going to happen in the first game. So since it didn't happen there, I was not expecting it here. And then when it did
Yeah.
happen, I was, oh snap! Okay, I'm very interested in what's going to happen. How did you feel when you get your first cut to it?
It was one of those things where it felt like a slow rollout, right? And it's kind of related to the Freya companion stuff as well, where it's like you get the camera moving over and Atreus is listening under, and then Atreus and Sindri are having their own conversation, because I thought it was going to be one of those moments where like Atreus is sneaking in on his dad's conversation and then Kratos is going to like catch him, and then
Yeah,
it's still going to like be part of that, and then it's like, oh no, now we're following Atreus and Sindri. Okay, cool. When are we moving the camera back to Kratos? Oh no, I'm staying with Atreus. Okay, this is going to be a cool like walking around segment to like give us an opportunity to like take a moment away from Kratos and just be with Atreus and learn who Atreus is without his dad. That's really cool. Cool little walking segment. And then it's like, no, you're going to Midgard and you're going to like fight people. And you're going to try to punch open a chest, but you're not Kratos. You're Atreus. So you punch open a chest and you almost break your hand. And it was one of
great
those
moment.
just like the longer it went, the more in disbelief I was, and I was just really impressed by that. And I was before the game had come out, it was like the kind of like when are they going to do like Kratos has to die, and then we're going to play the rest of the game as Atreus. We're so Last of Us Part 2 really did a number on gamers, I think, on
emotional
kind
damage.
Emotional damage on gameplay structure and storytelling structure and stuff when it comes to video games. And I knew that I had a feeling in my gut Ragnarok wasn't just going to copy that, because I obviously those games were being developed not together. They're two separate studios, but I felt like if Last of Us Part 2 had come out and that was something that they were working towards, and they saw Part 2 and they're like, maybe we got to find like our own way to do this. And they did, and it's fantastic. And the flow in between those two characters is really impressive. Like, yeah, there's a point where, Atreus, not with Kratos, like sets down his knife and then goes back, and then you don't realize, but the camera has kind of cut to a different location, but still on the knife, and then it's Kratos that picks up his version of that knife in a different location. It's just really, really cool, and I really liked playing as Atreus. I thought that was. It didn't feel overwhelming. There's a lot of menus in this game, and there's a lot of skill trees and a lot of armor sets with Kratos and a lot of amulet stuff and all of this stuff. And I think they put enough into Atreus, where it was like it felt substantial but not overwhelming. And that was one of the things that I was kind of impressed with, and just the way he feels. I was impressed with like how he felt he felt different and satisfying and not awkward and weird. I liked the kind of the bow and arrow, but also not just being beholden to the bow and arrow thing, using his bow to go up and kick the crap out of people and stuff like that. And how light he felt on his feet with his kind of dodging and stuff like that. And I thought he was really great. How'd you feel about more of the, we talk about momentum with a more weighty character. How did you feel about playing as Atreus?
I loved it just because he feels so nimble, right? Like his dodges are like a totally different kind of dodge. And like I liked that if you dodge, he'll do like a full dive, like he goes for it. I'm like, like he's like full get down, Mr. President, all the time. And I just there's something about like how quickly he can do a 6-hit combo that like really spoke to me, and I like that a lot of his like final hits and combo enders and stuff like that were about like positioning himself like away from an enemy to transition shot. Like there's like a lot of good
to give himself a second to like set up his shot and stuff like that. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's so they like there's a lot of care put into that. Not to say that like playing as Abby versus, but that in Last of Us Part 2, point of reference, that like had the benefit of Abby plays like Joel, Ellie, and like there's like a kind of psychological torture that the game is putting you through for that. In a good way.
There was a language there that didn't make it feel too jarring.
Exactly. And this was like a totally different thing, and it's funny too because like I was really expecting for like a big point of the game, Atreus gets his own second weapon. Like Kratos has the axe and the swords. At some point he gets a sword, but then it turns out to just be a companion character, and I was like, oh God,
I know,
damn it, why you gotta make a magic sword fight for itself? Like, what? Come on.
I know. I was really excited because that was a point where like we in 2018, right, you have the axe for the majority of the game, and then you get the change. You're like, oh shit, like there's weapon variety here. And I thought that was going to be a moment for Atreus as well, where it's like, all right, we have the bow, but then we can switch to the sword and like really upgrade this thing. And then it's just like kind of your buddy. And it's like, all right, like
it's fine.
It's
just am disappointed.
But I also get it because he's your buddy, but there's a story moment with that sword near the end of that game where I was like,
yeah,
all right,
it pays off for sure.
Yeah, it pays off. But when you're going through the motions, you're like, I want to hold the sword. I want to like actually like chop dudes up.
What if I like switched to the sword and then my bow started floating around? No. But yeah, so I really liked Atreus. I thought obviously a great way to get you to like his character is to play it, right? Like,
yeah,
it is the main vehicle by which we fall in love with controlling them and spending time with
Being
them
in
that
their
way.
shoes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It really worked for Atreus, and I just a lot of like where a teen Atreus is at. Like the first thing you do going to Midgard with him is to try and make peace with Freya. It's just him like talking to himself, walking to her like terrible idea. Like I really shouldn't
Yeah,
be
he's
doing
like,
this.
"Oh, you see me wearing the thing that killed your son?" Oh, funny story about that. Like he's
Yeah.
playing things out, like saying things out loud, playing it in his head as well, which is like a very just nervous teenager, anxiety written thing to do. And yeah, he's much more endearing in this game for sure. And yeah, I adore that.
That great
Um,
Kratos impression.
Oh yeah, that and he has a terrible Mimir
Yeah, the
impression,
Mimir.
which is
Oh.
great. Where he's like, he tries it, he's like, "Sorry, Mimir, I can't do your voice." And so, yeah, there's a lot of just him playing around with conversations that we heard so much of in 2018, right? And you know, getting his pure perspective on that because he's alone at times is just so. It makes you fall in love with him. Yes. You brought up Freya, him going to Freya at a certain point, but skipping a little ahead with Freya as a companion character.
Yeah.
That's where I was like, all right, I don't know where this game's going anymore.
Yeah, that is a
Because
fair, yeah.
so like it was one of those things, you know, Greg is my carpool buddy into work, and so every morning it was like he was a little bit ahead of me at certain points, and I think at a certain point I was a little bit ahead. We were kind of like trading back and forth, but every morning we would kind of talk about theories and all this stuff. And
That's fun.
yeah, and I, you know, making the God of War Can Kratos Be Better video, I made that video, and I wrote that script, I think like a month before we even got codes. And I made it with the assumption, right? With the end of 2018, you see, you know, the on the wall where seemingly Kratos has died. Like I went into it with the assumption of like, all right, Kratos is going to be the character who dies here, at the end of all this. And then we set up like, all right, we're playing as Atreus. All right, now we're setting up Freya as a companion character, and it really felt like, I don't know if anybody's safe, but someone needs to survive by the end of this, because it is not an open world game, but it is a game where like there is post game content. Like it's gonna work. Like in my mind, going through the game for the first time, I knew like it's gonna work like 2018. There's gonna be an equivalent to the Valkyries and stuff like that. There's no way that like you finish the story and it is just like, all right, that's it. Like, but then there was a morning where Greg and I were like, maybe there is like a almost like a Breath of the Wild situation where like once you play like the final boss, the last save that it loads up is your last, like before the final boss segment kind of thing, where you get the opportunity to go do everything else. And that's where it really threw us in for a loop of introducing Freya. And that's another portion of it where I did enjoy the, you know, it added a good amount where it felt in depth but not overwhelming, of giving her skill tree and stuff like that. And I love the little way that they explain, like now Atreus has like the bows that she originally has, where it's like, oh, Brock updated like the bows that I have, that's pretty cool, and stuff
Yeah.
like that. Like
Got patch
when
notes.
yeah, like, oh, I got patch notes because you know, Freya had these earlier. And
Yeah.
so I love that little kind of developer goof. But yeah, that was when she got introduced. That was like from a storytelling and gameplay mechanic thing of just the structure of that game. That's where I was like, I'm lost here, but I'm along for the ride. Just take me wherever you're going. This is really cool.
Yeah, that's like where I wanted her character to go in 2018, like in a sequel, obviously not necessarily in that game, because I really liked Freya up until
Yeah.
the end. And then, you know, she got choked out by Boulder. I'm like, I really don't.
Yeah.
I don't think this makes sense, and her being so angry doesn't make sense. But again, they take time with it. They take every piece of that story and they revisit it, and they like, you know, they're using every piece of the deer. Nothing is beat type deal. Everything
Exactly.
about 2018 is going to be revisited here, not necessarily like regretted, but
Hmm.
at least like that material is going to be for the better,
Yeah.
for the better of this. So I was so happy to get there with Freya and have her be on the team, like to the point where I thought she was going to be playing. At some point, I was like, all right,
yeah.
when's the Freya section going to happen? And I was here for it because she actually does have a sword. So I was ready for it.
We just wanted to play with a sword at some point in this
Exactly.
game.
Like a normal sword instead of like dual swords with chains.
Yeah. I loved that, her and Kratos get to spend one-on-one time together, because that was the the thing that I found endlessly fascinating with 2018 was how she was a reflection of Kratos and kind of a reminder of who he wasn't. I talk about in the video that I made that, like, he respects her and trusts her until he learns that she's a god. And I think there's a deeper anger, not just because she lied about or, omitted the fact that she was a god, but I think it kind of, that moment proved to him of like, oh shit, gods can be, selfless in a way that she is. And in his mind, gods were always these self-serving kind of assholes who just do whatever the hell they want. And I think she's a great character that challenges him on that. And so the fact that they get their own journey together, and they get to talk about a lot from their lives before they even met each other in this game, I found really, really special, and you really feel that bond, for sure. That I just, that was
and
blown away
like
by that.
that's like one of the things I want to talk about as soon as spoilers is conversation. But to me, it's also, and to talk about Kratos a little bit, like he needed that.
Yes.
And I love that because you start to like, Kratos gets to go to therapy in this game.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah.
He gets to like talk about it with somebody, please.
Yep.
Right? Like, and it's definitely implied that he talked about it somewhat with Faye. But it's not explicitly said in that much terms. So him like just gets it was like really satisfying character.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought like just having her come in as a companion again, like the Atreus section, mixing up the game in a way that is building on top of things, pulling the rug.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say about that, with like the different companions and stuff, like there was a moment where I realized where I think in that first, maybe at the end of the first section of having her as a companion, where she's like, we can go do whatever you want now before we like go do the next thing. And I'm like, wait, if I did half of like the very early Mimir side quest with Atreus and just left, I could just go back and do that with her. What? How did they account for that? How do they write for that? Like, that's where I was like, oh god, video game like creation is so complicated and so cool at the same time of like what they're able to pull off. And like, that was the moment where I was like, god damn, this is such an impressive game. So I just wanted to shout out that realization, where I thought that she was going to be a story mission companion character. Again, it's very similar to playing as Atreus, where it was like kind of like the longer it went, the more blown away I was. Same with her being a companion character, where it was like, at first it was like, all right, it's going to be for just a little bit. Or at first, she's just going to kind of like be a background character, not even like fight alongside you. Oh no, she's going to fight alongside you. Oh, she's going to have like specific arrows. Oh, she's going to have a skill tree. Oh my gosh. Oh, we can go off and do side quests with her. Holy shit. That was again, that was just one of those moments where I was like, god damn, this is a really, really cool, impressive game.
100%. And I don't know. Did you end up trying that? Like going back to
No, because again, that was the point in the story where I was like, I just want to get through. I just want to play through this main story and find things out. And that was something I meant to ask Eric when he was into the Kind of Funny studio, but the answer I think we got was yeah, it's real complicated, but we figured it out. So yeah.
Yeah, I know, because like some of that, I did some of that with Fafnir.
Yeah,
he doesn't have anything.
Right.
Yeah, I'd be curious.
Mhm.
All right, we're gonna take our spoiler hats off to talk about some more things. Don't want to know anything. Talk about it.
I'm not gonna take my actual hat off because my hair's a mess today. So,
I'm not gonna take my hair. Hair is also a mess, but that's
and
like
you look good in a ponytail bun. You know, yeah, yeah,
a disaster, and I can't take headphones.
yeah.
All right, so spoiler hats on. Talk about Kratos for a little bit. I really Kratos obviously like
Whew.
if I loved him in 2018, like I was like blown away by the trip we get to have with Kratos this game.
Yeah, this is again, it was one of those weird things where I was in the middle of editing the God of War retrospective, kind of focus on specifically him as a character and his journey. And there were a lot of moments in Ragnarok where I was like, how did I like kind of hit some of these things on the nose of like where he ends up, especially like at the very end of the game of like what a god like being a god means to him and serving others and not himself and having that be the kind of core of his story. Every big moment that builds up to that, I was just applauding silently in my head while
Yeah.
playing this at like midnight or whatever, right? It was just, and so the way it kind of crescendos at the very end of the game, right? Like it's safe to kind of talk about this, or we're in the
We're
spoiler
in the
zone.
spoiler zone.
So like when he's looking at the very last kind of Fey um
Promise.
uh prophecy, right, where it's him as this golden statue and people are like kind of worshiping him, and he kind of like he has that moment where he's like, this is the new path for me. I don't have to be stuck as this guy who just works for himself. I can be someone, I can choose to be someone who actually works for others and isn't just this terrible human.
Yeah.
And the way he again, performance by Christopher Judge in this game is
So
phenomenal. And there's so many moments that we can talk about. And this where he's kind of breaking down, where he
yeah.
didn't think this was ever a realistic thing for him,
The first time it
and
actually overwhelmed.
yeah, you know, and that's like that was a major tearjerker for me. Especially like playing those original games and kind of seeing tiptoeing like where they're kind of going in 2018 and then seeing it fully realized in this game. I was like, God damn, the payoff here is phenomenal. And you know, Greg said in the kind of funny review that he thinks that Kratos might be the best written character in video games. I don't know if I'm quite there with him, but he's a top 5, I think,
Yeah.
based off of this in 2018 for sure.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think like that moment resonates in particular because like I like it might frustrate some people, but I really liked how often the characters are asking questions if there is.
Mhm.
And one of
Right.
those questions, like what did and I think in that moment, Kratos realizes like they wanted you.
Yeah.
She wanted you to redeem, which you
Mhm.
have, and I think that like that she set him on that path, and he couldn't know that because throw it all off
Right.
how Destiny worked. Um,
She just had to like she kind of had to like start off the breadcrumb trail, and then she just had to trust that he would find the rest of the way, you know.
and it's tough because like trust is another big theme in this game,
Yep.
and when you don't have all the information, it's hard to trust people. But yeah, I that and the woodcutter story, where Kratos is finally like trying to tell a story to express how he feels, and it's like the most heartbreaking thing in the world, and then Atreus falls
Yeah.
asleep, and you're like, I like wasn't sure how real it got so quickly.
I know, and the way he kind of breaks down, and I don't know if that's like an actual like tale or from Greek mythology that he like grew up being told and stuff like that, because it to me that was so interesting for it being the main kind of like theme for his arc in this game of just like awaiting for death, right? And you think in that scene, right, that it's about like, yeah, it's his time has come and it's time for him to go on to the next life. he's done all the work he can. And then you get the follow up later on, right? Of they're walking up with Angrboda to the the kind of final prophecy, and he tells the rest of the story. And in my head, I'm like, was this actually the rest of the story, or is this you making a new end to this story because this is where you're at now?
Yeah.
But again, I don't know if that's the actual tale. Maybe in the comments, someone could let me know later on. I can read to see if that's how that actually ended, or if he changed it just because that's what he feels about life now, because it's not the end for him. Now he can be like, no, I'm not ready for death. Let's keep doing the work. And see, like, that's what he literally says that a few minutes later to the adults who have to kind of stay behind and fix the mess that they left behind, where he's like, we've got work to do, which I absolutely loved. But yeah, to go back to the tent scene, right, where him breaking down again, another 10 out of 10 performance from Judge, right? That was just heartbreaking to see. Not like I can't even relate to it in a way because it's a lot from his perspective, the parent story, right? But it's just such a human kind of thing to feel, where you kind of feel at the end of your rope, and not being able to talk about that with even your closest loved one, and it being hard. It's just, yeah, that was fantastic. And then we got to talk about the face sequences, because they're just so good. And shout out to Karen from Deborah Ann Wool, who plays
Immediately
Karen
recognized her. I wanted you to know. I was like, oh
I
shit,
know.
that's Deborah Ann Wool.
It's like, oh, it's Karen from Daredevil. That I was like, but it was one of those things where I was like, I think this is her, but maybe it's just like they modeled it to kind of look like her, and it's a completely different actress and stuff like that. Like, it was hard to kind of figure that out, especially before embargo and before things were kind of public. So
yeah, I checked the credits. It's real.
Yeah.
He doing the meme. I know you.
Yeah. And yeah, like those sequences were so great, because I feel like that was something I kind of missed from 2018, was getting, like, I know it starts with like her death, but I was kind of wanting a little bit more context of his relationship with her. Yeah. Right. And I loved all of those scenes, even though they were short, seeing that and kind of seeing how little he even grew, even though he's in this relationship with this woman, and they do care about each other, of like just him grunting and her giving him shit about it too was just so good, where he's just like, am I supposed to take that a certain way? And the last one that we see, that starts after that tent sequence, where it's him helping her put up the protective barrier that we see gets broken at the beginning of 2018 and again at the beginning of 2022. And just great performances all around from both of them.
Yeah, that last one made it all work. The first two, I was like, okay, I don't necessarily know where this is going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was interesting too. I remember that first one, especially like at the end, where she's like, the time's coming and stuff like that, and I was like, oh, is she trying to, like, is this going to be like her communicating throughout the game, like Beyond the Dead kind of stuff? But then it turns more into self-reflective of like what he needs to be doing, and kind of looking back to be able to see a clear path in the future. But yeah, it really did come together in that final one, because I was definitely like,
is this
trying to communicate beyond the grave, especially when they get to the land of Alfheim, and he hears her singing, which is not something he heard in 2018, but that's something Atreus heard. Yeah. And I was like, this is so interesting. Like, what are we doing here?
Is Faye gonna show up in some capacity?
Right.
Okay, I'm gonna tell you just before we go into other things, the part that I felt went on.
Okay. Yeah, and that's the where you first play, or not first play. That's second Atreus scene, where he kind of sleeps dreams his way over to Jotunheim, which I just love. Of like, oh, I dreamed so hard that I woke up here. I was like, sure, why not? Yeah. That's really good, because I love the sequence getting there, right? Yeah. Where it's like him
reflecting on his
all of his younger selves being like, whatever.
Again, I love that, because we're using the stuff that I didn't like before, and we're building on top of it. Every piece of the animal every bone, like, and I was
Yep.
like, this is good. I'm in. We're in Jotunheim. I was here for it. I think part of it was like I was so stressed, like so mad. Like the whole time.
Especially when Angerboda is like, you've been gone longer than you
I was
than you
like,
think you have. I was like,
man,
oh no.
yeah, I was like so worried.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So that was the so I assumed correctly when I was talking about it earlier. Revisiting it, I was like, huh, we're actually like we're not here as long as I felt like it felt like the first time around.
Yeah.
Which was interesting, and I do think it is because it is such a all right, stop. Hammer time a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's get a little bit of self-reflection and just kind of sit with things for a little bit, especially because I love that. I feel like that's kind of getting into the end of the first third of the game, I want to say. Getting into the second third of the game. I think I would need to kind of look at a walkthrough breakdown of like where that actually happens in percentage of the story, right?
Yeah, that sounds.
And I love that he gets told the prophecy so early about his dad.
Yeah.
I really, that was one thing where I didn't want that to be not told to him until the moment, right, or later on, or they avoided it, but he didn't know that they avoided it, kind of thing. I love that that's something he found out, and something he found out on his own without Kratos. And I love that there's a little bit of time afterwards, right, where they're kind of holding that secret from each other, but they both know it, but they don't know that each other. It's a fun circumstance there, and yeah, I do think I do understand though of like the fruit collecting and stuff like that. Like it does feel slow, especially when
It
you're
was
riding the animal through the water and stuff like that.
it was because like there's a whole boss fight too that you got to go through.
Oh, I love that.
And
I
it's a
love
great fight.
yeah.
Great story. Could have used a little bit more setup on what the hell was going on with this. I figured, like, I was like, I think I know what's going on.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is probably Jormungandr, but like, we could establish some thicker lines here, like for
Right.
me, just in case, like, but like it was
because like Atreus put it together in his head where he's like, oh, this is what's happening right now.
Yeah.
But I do agree with you where it was a little bit like, are we thinking the same thing though? Like I feel like I think it needs to be said out loud for it to really get through to the player, because I was in that same moment of like, did we just make Jormungandr?
Yeah.
I think so, but maybe not. Like because I was still like at that point in the game, I was then convinced that the crazy theory about Kratos turning into Jormungandr might also have been true, especially with oh yeah, that was like
fun.
where they're similar, like through his scales there's some similar coloring. We knew that Kratos and Thor were going to fight in Ragnarok, so there was possibly Kratos was the one who got brought back into time and for whatever reason got turned into a snake. There was also the setup of the little balls, the orbs that the giants use to put their souls into, and there was the one empty one. And when she introduced the one empty one, I was like, oh, he's gonna use that to put in, like, to get Kratos' soul when Kratos dies or whatever, and then he's gonna put it into a different snake, I think, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and Angerboda, when you see her in Muspelheim, she's like, yeah, that snake is way bigger. I was like, okay, all right, I got it.
Yeah.
But it was like, we brush over. But the part in that section was like when you go into cave and you're like opening a bunch of treasure chests incessantly, and like you have to like find
the color cave.
Yeah.
That I will agree. Even on the second playthrough, I was like, I'm all right.
I was like,
like,
is there's more stuff after this? And then that's when you go and have the boss fight out. Okay. Well, once we got back into that, I was it just was like me stressing about that, and a lot of time. But again, they do use it, they utilize it well to help build up Loki as an idea.
Yeah.
And Atreus as a but
and Angerboda and their relationship, right?
Yeah.
And I love that moment too, where she is. I think it's after the grandma fight where she's really messed up. A lot of words were thrown into her face, because this whole idea of prophecy is also hanging over her head, as it is everybody else in this game. And I just love that little moment where we get to see them be teenagers again, where Atreus is like, rematch, let's go race again. And then
Yeah.
Atreus like turns into the wolf, and I loved the whole arc of like her helping him control, like very early on, like controlling his anger, which is something that Kratos, it took a very long time to figure out and do. And how Atreus's Loki's anger manifests into him turning into different animals is really, really sick. And yeah, him being able to, like, there's even like a moment, and it's in the middle of a like a fight sequence against Draugr or whatever, where she's like, all right, do it, but control it. Like, you bring this on, don't let the anger take over you, and the anger bring this out, you bring it out, and you actually do it on your own. And it's so good, because that moment pays off so many times, or not so many times, but it pays off in the race, because it's like, he's controlling this is awesome, and then you get to run around as the wolf, and it's really cute. And then it also pays off for me personally when you get to Ragnarok, and you're kind of going back and forth playing as Kratos and Atreus, and you're with the Sindri as Atreus, and you get caught under rocks, and Sindri's getting beaten up, and it's another moment of payoff of he gets to control this, and he turns into the bear, and you're like, fuck yes. And his theme music hits, which I think might be my favorite track from the entire score, which I don't think is getting talked about enough. I think the music in this game is absolutely phenomenal.
Very good.
Like, there's nothing that can beat the hype of the boom, oh, like it's so good and powerful. But they're, like the many other aspects of this game, they just experimented way more.
Yeah.
I think with the soundtrack of this one, and there's so many different moods. There's fun, lighthearted versions of Loki's theme. There's really hype version of his theme when you turn into the bear, in the whole Ragnarok fight and stuff like that. It's really cool and impressive. But
Yeah. The different realm music, just like the background music.
yeah,
Artelheim has it.
mm-hmm.
Just good, like a lot of good, like tangy sounds throughout the soundtrack.
Yeah,
Always here for.
I was also, just like a general thing, just 'cause, before I forget, I was impressive how revisiting all of these areas and not having it feel the same way again. That was something I kind of talked about when I was streaming a little bit of my journey to the platinum, and doing a lot of the Niflheim stuff, which was the first time I ever did that. And I was like, I know that they said in Ragnarok, like, we're going to be able to go to every realm of, like, how are they going to redo Niflheim without doing this? Because I'm going to be honest, I didn't love the Niflheim stuff in 2018. So I was like, just hoping that they didn't do that again. I was like, how do they do Muspelheim without doing, what's his face? Searchers challenges and stuff like that. And I love how they recontextualize places of Niflheim is just kind of like you go to get your presents from the dead ravens, which I thought was actually like, that was like weirdly a really cool payoff from the 2018 game, where you're like, oh, I've actually like been doing something instead of just killing ravens.
Yeah.
Like, this is kind of like a cool, like, you're setting them free from Odin's control. Like, that's really rad. And then it's also kind of a training area in case you want it. But then it's also used for like a story segment.
It's a training area if you want to just grind out all of the extra skills you can get, which is what I did immediately, and maxed out all my weapons.
That's a good tip for when I eventually go back for the platinum stuff.
It's not required for the platinum. Like,
okay. Well, I'm sure like just grinding those things will just help with, like, some of the crazy fights that you're gonna get into, and like later end game stuff, which I have not touched at all. It's I've heard some of the cool, like, big kind of story stuff that happens after the main story stuff.
That's good stuff.
I know. I feel like I'm missing out on like a quarter of the story, because so much of the side stuff is like kind of actually feels big in a way.
Yeah.
Which is another thing I'm really impressed by, even early on, right? When you go to that first, when you go to Svartalheim early on, and you get the quests for like both quests are kind of dealing with Mimir, right? Which it's easy to fall in love with Mimir in 2018 because he's just kind of like, yeah, fuck Odin, but also like, let me tell you all these cool stories, and like I'm a really good storyteller. But then it's like you kind of forget like he was a servant of Odin at one point, so he did do a lot of messed up things. And like early on, they showcase even in just side quest stuff how much they're building on top of what was the groundwork in 2018 of like, yeah, he did some messed up stuff to Svartalheim and other realms, and to Freya's people. And let's talk about that in a very real way with like this poor giant creature stuck in the, like chained down in this lake in Svartalheim. I really loved stuff like that, so I can't wait to kind of see a lot of the other stuff I've heard about on my own. Once I get back to it, there's so many games, Alex. There's so many games.
There's so many games. Mimir was another thing on my list of like things that didn't fully work for me in 2018. Like I like Mimir. I think he's obviously a very likable character, but like it's hard to have him with like Kratos and that relationship they have. So, and Ragnarok.
Yeah, he's the 2018 Jester.
Exactly.
And that's always, and like for me personally, like I didn't need anything more than that. And, and I love that they, develop that more and kind of transform him more in this one, which was really cool.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like the first time Kratos calls Mimir brother, hey, you got me.
Yeah, I think I read it in the journal where he was like one of the few, like not many that I would call brother, but he is one where I was like, God damn it.
Yeah,
like, that's
they got me.
Good. They got me, man. And then like at the end of the game when Atreus is like, I think like he straight up says it where he's like, I think of you as another dad, and Mimir's like, you don't have to say it because Mimir's not comfortable with it because he's so used to Kratos not saying what he's feeling, and Atreus being like, no, I'm gonna say what I feel because that's how I am as a person. I need to say it to you. And it's like, God damn it, especially because there's a moment, there was some before the final Ragnarok sequence where you set up the tent stuff. There's a little bit of a point where Atreus and Mimir are like, hey, like maybe let's delay the inevitable a little bit and go out and adventure. So I did do a little bit at that point just to be like, all right, let's take a breather. Let's knock out some Midgard fights or whatever. And there's a point, there's a sequence of back and forth where Atreus is like, what do you do when you like someone, but you're not sure if they like you back? And like Mimir's the one trying to like spearhead it because he knows whatever Kratos is gonna say is not gonna be great. And it's like, and you really feel that there of like, yeah, Mimir is really the second dad, and you
gotta go back to Jotunheim after you beat. I don't know if you have, because
no.
Kratos
the only thing I did after beating the game really for both playthroughs, obviously it was very early on they're like, hey, we're having this funeral for Brock, which we have not even talked about all that shit yet with Tyr and Odin and that whole twist.
We haven't talked about Odin and Thor at all yet, which we'll talk about in a bit, but there's a great moment with Mimir and
ooh, that's exciting. That's exciting.
Without saying too much. It's a little piece of dialogue, but it's one of those, like, just like that one is very memorable. This will stick with. Yeah, there's also another point, like if you're wandering post game, where Kratos will be like, Mimir, tell me a story, and it's like that never happens, obviously, and
because it's usually Atreus.
Yeah, he tells a very good story, and he gets a chuckle out of Kratos, and Mimir's like, a rare Kratos chuckle. I will treasure this forever. And I was like, oh my god, they got me again. So there's some good Mimir stuff post.
That's awesome.
But yeah, that like Kratos Mimir relationship helped me connect with him. Like Mimir gets like pissed off at one point in this game at Atreus and stuff, like just like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, with the whole what's the creature's name before he turns it into Fenrir? Garm or whatever, where he's like, you released Garm, you really fucking shit the bed at this one. Like everybody's pissed at him, and again, to bring it back to Kratos in a way of like Kratos being the one guy who's like, y'all need to shut up.
Yeah, we're gonna fix
he
this.
messed up. He messed up, and he didn't do it on purpose, and all this stuff. And I love that it's Kratos is the one who isn't, lecturing Atreus in that moment, because there's so many things Kratos fucked up in his own mythology that he did on purpose,
Yeah.
right? And I love that he was like, hey, no, like this isn't something he did this out of passion, not out of being a bad person. And I love that Kratos is able to kind of recognize that with Atreus. Um,
Yeah. But
yeah.
to talk about Kratos in the spoiler section a bit, man, how did you feel when they brought out Demos? Because I lost my fucking mind.
Calliope,
Yeah,
dude.
finally Calliope gets name dropped.
I know, like I love that too, because she really tries to throw it in his face, where she's like, Freya is like, you don't know what it's like to lose a child, and he was like, I have, and it takes her a moment to be like, oh shit, Atreus isn't your first child, and yeah, that pale, like, yeah, so being able to like. I did not expect playing through the original games, especially when I was in the middle of playing through the original games, where it's like there's a lot that feels very surface level in those games.
Yeah.
That I did not expect to like pay off playing them, to have full on conversations about his brother, and using that to help Freya process her feelings towards her own brother. Them trying to reconcile their friendship, talking about their lost children. That whole sequence, I was like, holy crap, it really made playing those games worth it, to get to this sequence and really talk about it. And I was really like,
and her bringing up the thing of like, oh, is this why you don't do this? Because you think of Demos, and he like doesn't have the confidence.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, like that whole therapy session was definitely one of my favorite sequences. And helps that like Vanaheim is probably like my favorite. Probably because it's fucking massive.
Yeah.
Like, it's a whole like you go. I was like, oh, I'll do some side quests with Atreus. Like, oh, there's just a continent up here, I guess.
Yeah.
In this crater back here. That like, and you learn.
I think if we're talking about favorite locales, I think it might be Svartalheim for me. It's a little basic, but it is. That's another like very big area that you could go around and explore and just get lost in. There's just something about the design and almost like color palette of Svartalheim that feels varied and just interesting to me. But yeah, I did really love run around Vanaheim. The one of the few mechanic things I don't love, these plants that you gotta kill. I'm gonna be honest, and then they kept like if you killed a plant and then left that area, and then like there's a lot of like backtracking and stuff. It just like came back to life, and I'm like, God, I fucking killed you like 10 minutes ago. Stay dead, please.
Those little poison poppers got me. Way too. I would like go up to a chest and then look left, and it just explodes on me.
Like, all right, cool. It's like, all right, whatever. But I do like the kind of the lore there, right? Where every realm is handling Ragnarok in a very Fimbulwinter in a very different way. It doesn't literally just mean winter. I was like, all right, that's cool. Like I like that interpretation. So I felt like it was a smart way for them to be like, all right, we can't just do snow everywhere. Like that's just going to be really one note and kind of boring eventually, right? Yeah, and so I'm lost. We went down a rabbit hole a little bit. So
now that we're in spoilers, I want to talk about my favorite sequence in the game, which is the building of Draupnir, which was from beginning to end, front to back, Sindri going into the basement to the lady in the well, the lady of the forge, excuse me.
Yeah, lady
was
of the forge.
Like to Kratos saying, "Please bless my spear." The coolest, most dungeons ever been. To Brock, yeah, like that is like front to back my favorite thing, because it feels like a folktale. Like the way everything happens, it feels like you are in the middle of
it's one of those things, like it's you don't get that. I really besides Atreus being responsible for the death of Baldur at the end of 2018, you don't really get that in 2018. Whereas, like, in the original Greek God of War games, right, there were little moments like that where it's
Yeah.
like of course, I'm blanking on like all of the examples I could be using, but like outside of the like or in the middle of these main stories, Kratos is also kind of like in the middle of these kind of known smaller tales that he is kind of making sure kind of happen because they're just kind of in his way.
Yeah.
And this was one of them where it felt like, oh, like we're doing like a smaller tale in this whole thing that
Yeah.
just like you're saying feels like a little folk tale. That's really really cool.
Yeah. And just like aesthetically, I had to like look up Drop Near, which feels to me like they were like somebody on that writing team. I don't know if you guys talked about this in the dev interview, but like it felt like somebody on that writing team had read through Norse mythology front to back and was obsessed with like one obscure piece of mythology and was like, we have to do it. I have an idea with this.
Yeah. I think we didn't talk about it in the sense of Drop Near like the ring because I think it might have been mentioned of just like it's just a really cool thing of just like this almost like a hassle where you see Sindri go down there and it's like, all right, I'm gonna pull up this rope and it's like hopefully the one on the rope is actually Drop Near and stuff like that because like it reminded me of of the sequence from Harry Potter where it's the goblet that they're looking for in that final thing and the room is filling up with that and the way that they're able to play with it here where it's like they have like you have to assume like that the tree of life or whatever is filled up like because they're inside that tree and so it's filled up so much to the point where it's not too far down this branch inside this tree and you're like, oh geez, that's got to be so many rings down there and like the way he almost loses it, so good.
And just like the way that's shot and like it's the only time we really like of a few handful of times that we are and the camera's on a non-player character.
And like you're totally like you're like Kratos and Atreus aren't even like near him at all. Like you're just following Sindri, and it's such a cool little again actually playing
using
with
the camera.
a single shot in a very fun way.
Yeah, in a very fun way. But yeah, like taking that and you like, I loved that you don't know where it's going. You don't know what you're gonna get at the end of this.
Yeah.
It's
because Brock and Sindri are talking like, oh, if we do this thing, oh, and then that thing, you're like, what are you talking about? And just to get the slow reveal, you're like, okay,
yeah, and then it being a spear, and it just being like, oh, this is like this feel like when it is formed into this weapon, it feels like nothing else has, and it's just so cool. And then it turns into being like this extremely fun weapon, and like. Coming into the game, like the thing on my checklist of like what I really want this game and give it the same love that the Blade Axe have gotten.
Yeah.
And it was that point when Freya joined the crew where I was like, and I had accepted it.
And like and I knew and I'm glad this was something Eric had said on the interview as well where he was like he knew Mjolnir was going to be too easy of an answer. It was going to be too similar to the axe, and stuff like that. And I'm glad that was like kind of his read on that as well because I felt like so many predictions for this game was like, oh, we're going to get that hammer. In my head, I was like,
I never thought
easy. That's way too easy of an answer, and it's got to be something. It's got to be something else that feels different. Whether it's we do play as Atreus for the rest of the game and he's got a different weapon. It's got to be something else, not just the axe, right? And the fact that it's a spear, which I didn't even think about at first, and it's not until Kratos says it, right? Or Brock brings up, he's like, "You're doing pretty good with this spear." And Kratos is like, "It's the first weapon that a Spartan is, trained to use." I was like, "Oh my god!" And then I remember someone even in a comment somewhere talked about like. Going all the way back, the earliest we ever see Kratos, him as a child training with Deimos, is with a spear, and it's like, oh, that's the way that they bring things back is so smart.
What's even cooler too, like having now gone and played Ghosts of Sparta, which is the other game that lets you as one of the major weapons, the Spartan tool shield, the sprinting attack that you can unlock in God of War Ragnarok is same as the end of the 3. Like almost down to the end. from Ghost of Sparta, and I'm like, man, like somebody like at Ready at Dawn must be like freaking out because the second God of War PSP game is getting like
getting referenced heavily,
unimaginable amount of love in God of War Ragnarok, and it's like that's really cool. But also like in Ghost of Sparta, as someone who played it for the first time recently, the whole thing is like in that final boss with Thanatos, you can hit down on the D-pad to have Deimos throw the spear. Yeah. And that is like the exact mechanic of having Atreus shoot arrows. And it's like, man, has Ghost of Sparta been the prequel to God of War
this game?
Time? Yeah.
And like it's so sad, like again, like in its own right, like we talk about the motion and the feeling of calling the axe back being so sad, like throwing and calling it back being so satisfying. I don't know if there was an equivalent to that for the chains in 2018. The chains were just fun to use, but I don't feel like there was a thing that felt as satisfying as calling back the axe with the chains. But then in Ragnarok, I feel like the kind of close equivalent is being able to use it for traversal of quickly being able to pull up. And then the thing with Dropnir is the throwing a bunch of them and then
the
hammering it down, and then like the multiple hit, especially like in that Heimdall fight, which I feel like is the kind of the end of the sequence of really learning how to use that weapon. Is just so damn satisfying.
Yeah, so good. Beautiful weapon also. And just like conceptually, from design to it being the ring that Kratos is wearing to how it brilliant. Like,
yeah,
it is like the most Dungeons and Dragons. I can see like the item sheet, how like tabletop it feels, but like to do that and then execute so well. I will say the move for the chains for me, period, which is R2 and like hold R1 and pull yourself and slam people, which was a runic attack out of War 2018. You just do that in this game.
Yeah, you just unlock it in this one. Yeah,
there's a really pommel grip for the blades that makes that move do tons of stun, and you can just pull and kill. It's just nonstop.
That's good to know.
And I was
good to know.
Ooh, babe, that's what I like. Yeah, Dropnir is brilliant, and it was so fun. It was like the first weapon that I maxed out all the. I just realized I was like doing everything I could do with that weapon because it felt so. Utilize every part of it. Yeah, just what a brilliant. In the spoiler section, we haven't talked about the villain. There's a lot to talk about there. We'll try and keep it relatively, but yeah, I think, and I've seen this impression, but from other people as well. But like that first scene is incredible, where Thor and Odin show up to your house. It is great,
right?
But it is definitely like especially with Odin, I was like, this is a vibe that I don't know if I'm picking up what you're putting down. But the more time you spend with that character, like, and you see what kind of like gaslighter Odin.
Oh yeah.
I was like, I loved that. It felt like there was like just a really cohesive take for Smith and it. But more than that, like I love Thor a lot. I think Thor is like incredibly well.
Oh yeah.
Knowing everything we know coming into this game, the mere story and from theory and all these things, all these places.
Right.
But then seeing him, but a thing that I loved, and again, putting those pieces together from 2018, I totally saw Boulder, how he. I felt like, oh man, Boulder makes so much more as a character, how he acts,
right,
overconfident. When I see and like how
interact, and it's just them now, know, and it's like, oh, you kind of see the missing wheel and how this whole thing operated beforehand.
Yeah, totally. But like great little touches, and Lord knows this game is full of so much foreshadowing, just like 2018. But again, I think it's better utilized here. But like in the beginning, like Thor pours these drinks and then he doesn't drink, and then you find out later that he stopped drinking. contextualizes that whole moment in a
Yeah.
really different way.
And then you're like you walk down as Loki at some point in the middle of Odin and Thor arguing, and then Odin's like, go off. I liked you better when you drank and stuff like that. And then you're like, oh, that's kind of a shitty thing to say, whatever. And then like the next time I think you see Thor later on, he's at the bar, and you're just like, oh shit, dude, like the weight that his dad's words carry, like, kind of weigh on him, it's like that's heartbreaking. It's funny that you say like you weren't quite sure if you were picking up what they were putting down with Odin, because I was sold on it right away, because I remember for 2018 I think Corey had said like they really wanted to interpret the Norse gods as almost like this biker gang, which definitely threw me into for a loop meeting Odin, because he felt like the one who didn't feel like he was part of a biker gang. Like Baldur makes sense, Thor makes sense, and then Odin kind of walks in. I felt like he was the head of a mafia gang. Yeah, like he's the head of a mob, and for whatever, and maybe it's just because I'm a fan of like the Dark Knight trilogy, and there's a lot of that. Like I feel like inspiration, not direct inspiration, but a lot of that kind of vibe of the or like even oh man, just like mob movies and stuff like that I enjoy a lot. I really loved that interpretation, especially with how gaslighty he is and how two-faced he is, with especially like when it depends on getting what he wants, right? Yeah, I really really loved that, and I loved his whole character in many different angles, especially when it comes to the tier perspective, which is fascinating to me. And that was a question that I will probably still have for a long time, is just like how fun it was to perform that for the actor who plays Tyr, of being like, you're not really playing Tyr, you're playing Odin playing Tyr. And it's like, huh, interesting.
I
And
always
like,
wonder how like that must be to receive that in like the pitch meeting, right?
right.
Do they like tell you afterwards so that way it doesn't fuck with you too much, or do they have to tell you beforehand so you can?
And
add
so,
to it?
and this is like how I felt like the way it's directed and acted, it's like everybody had to have known.
Yeah.
Because on the second playthrough, it is fascinating, of like when you go to Alfheim, and you get the true Groa prophecy, and
I rewatched
Tyr,
this recently too, and you can see
yeah,
his
and the
body
way
language.
it plays, oh yeah, and
totally
like
different.
the first time you are watching that scene, you're like, oh, Tyr's is kind of like impressed that Groa was able to lie to Odin, and so like, he's distracted. But then when you go back and watch that scene, you kind of see the anger in his face. You see him like kind of bump into Atreus and stuff like that, and there's just like, again, there's the joke that all I like to do is replay video games, and it's shit like this is why.
This is why I'm saying
it's fascinating, and like on deeper levels of interpretations and things like that, and getting into the heads of knowing the full story and getting really into the heads of these characters. I just loved where they went, and it's heartbreaking when you see the reveal, right? Because it leads to Brock's death, and I love that. I don't know why I love that Brock was the one that was able to kind of sniff it out, where he's like, something is wrong here. And it's just heartbreaking that it led to his death.
Yeah, but again, like, it's a thing like where, to me, like, Atreus being responsible for Boulder dying and then Freya getting mad at him didn't work. But Atreus being responsible for Tyr killing Brock indirectly, and there are consequences with Sindri, did work for me, because the theme of this game is like consequences, inadvertent or otherwise, for your actions, right? And sometimes they're good, like Kratos stopping and being like, "Hey, I was wrong about this consequence. Hey, we changed fate. Something this Kratos didn't die," and to being like, "Hey, I need to do this because we can't just nothing." And Brock dies, right? Like, it is. It's always, I think there has to be a little edge on a story where it does things that you don't like, people that you like, because like there's no teeth of it.
And it really, it really bums me out with how things are left off with Sindri by the end of the game. I love that he's the one that kills Odin, though. Like,
Yeah.
he's the one who, like, they don't know what to do with this orb that you know is the, you know, I love that they set up, and, like, in my head, I was like, they're going to use that to save Kratos. But then it ends up being, like, you know, that's what they use to get Odin's soul. And I love that, you know, Atreus holding Odin with the soul pouring out is, you know, what we see with him on the wall with Kratos, but instead now it's Odin, because that's the path that the mom wanted to set them on without, you know, fully showing them that that was a possibility.
Yeah.
And I love that he's the one that takes it, but then he just kind of blips out, and you're like, God damn it, I wanted some sort of closure here, and it's so upsetting, and especially with the kind of going to Brock's funeral too, and Atreus isn't even there, and it's one of those things where it's like, it's probably better that he isn't, because Sindri has, like, so much that he doesn't know what to do with his feelings towards Atreus, and it breaks my heart. And him not even being able to speak to Kratos, and Kratos trying to be as a friend, just trying to be there for him, and him just being like, no, you don't get to talk to me. And it was one of those weird things. There's going to be a weird reference here. Ted Lasso season 2 spoilers. It reminds me of Nathan from Ted Lasso, Nate the Great, who kind of becomes the third coach of that soccer team, or football team, sorry. And
Please.
yeah. And he's kind of he's the levee that breaks at the end of season 2. And it's a lot of criticism for season 2 of Ted Lasso is like, oh, most of it is like, it's too happy-go-lucky, too hunky-dory. And I was able to tell really early on, I was like, no, it's that on the surface level, but someone is getting, like, all of the emotional weight here, and it's Nate. And I love that they did that same thing with Sindri, where you don't really notice it until Brock is dead, and they have that conversation with him at their shop in Tyr's vault, or like Tyr's temple, where he's like, you know, I've given you so much, and you take, and you hurt me, and you got my brother killed, and he lists all these things, and you're like, fuck yeah, he is the one who is carried the most, and he is just broken now. And yeah, that hurt me a little bit. And I hope that there, again, I have not done much end game stuff, so I hope there's at least something there outside of just the funeral, to you know, reconcile it even just a little bit. But that was one that really hurt me, leaving the main story of that game.
Yeah, and I can see it hurting a lot of people. And it's one of those things of, like, the way Freya's story is handled here, it gives me faith that, you know, get there. We'll work it out.
Yeah.
But it's going to take time. And I appreciate that. And I also really appreciate, like, when they do get to the Brock's shop at Tyr's Temple, Kratos is like, hey, grieve how you need. Something that he said in 2018 of, like, hey, just because I am not grieving, you're grieving, doesn't mean that I'm.
Right.
And he never takes that away from him. That's like a thing that because, you know, he grieved his family by killing half of Greece, you know?
Yeah.
So, like, he knows.
Not
like,
half of Greece. He killed like all of Greece.
That's true. It was pretty much underwater by the time he was done.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And it's just one of those things that set up so well, and it's paid off so well. And their relationship is obvious. It hurts more for Sindri because.
Yeah.
And it all creates, like, such a cohesive. But yeah, I that moment with Odin was great. I was gonna say earlier, I think just, like, with the writing just put me off. Like, it was specifically, and it still makes me feel weird every time, is when Odin refers to Freya as my. Just sounds weird.
Yeah.
In that game, you know, I think that, like, that's what kind of, like, I got stuck in my head about in that intro. But then it's just like, especially, like, you go to when Atreus goes to Asgard, meeting Heimdall.
Oh yeah, I love that Heimdall is, like, honestly might be the worst out of all of them.
Yeah, totally. Because he's the believer, you know.
Yeah.
Odin doesn't believe.
Talking about really quick, right before Heimdall, talking about colloquialisms, just the amount of, like, hearing the word shit from we have Link at home, Breath of the Wild Link at home. That kid,
Skjol or whatever.
yeah, Skjol or whatever. Anytime that kid says shit, I'm like, this feels like this is your first time saying that word because you're not near your parents right now, and and that. My first impression of that character didn't leave the best taste in my mouth. I'm going to be honest. I know there's maybe a little more to see of him, especially because you talk to him when Atreus leaves.
There is a great post game.
Yeah,
I'll let you can find, because I wasn't expecting to find it, the gold coin that Odin gives Kratos. You can find that. In the world, and it pays off very well. Yeah, that's fair. Skjol's in two scenes. So.
Yeah, and that was something I wasn't as sold on because it's one of those weird story wise and character wise. Naturally, because we're going back and forth between Atreus and Kratos, and I'll make this real short, just because I know we're talking about a lot here. Because of things that you miss out on because you're playing as one character, there are some things where I wasn't as sold on. So like when we're going back to Atreus after he's run away and he's staying in Asgard for a little bit, so you kind of miss out on him being friends with Skjold and Thrud and stuff like that. And so there's like, I wanted to believe in them as like a trio of friends who like kind of trust each other but are learning to trust each other, maybe don't trust each other all the time, but it wasn't quite there for me. So I just wanted to also put that out there before I forget, because I want to go back to Heimdall, because that entire meeting was awesome.
Yeah, and I knew it.
So
like,
good.
it's cool that like Bifrost is purple, so when you see his eyes are purple, it's like, oh, like I like that you are allowed to figure that himself. Obviously he has Gallarhorn on him at all times. But yeah, man, like, what a piece of garbage. But like, just good to hate. Like, very much like he had like that same energy the Greek gods had. Like, especially like. He had a very big Hermes. He
did.
and that like that works, like, because like once you start seeing like a hierarchy of power, it's good to have like those things in a slot in a God of War game. I felt and major props to Scott Porter
for that performance. And I did not know that was him.
I didn't know that was him until right now. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, 10 out of 10 performance from him, and that was the one thing I was like, what does this remind me so much of? And yeah, it's like it brings you back to that God of War 3 era where you're like, you're on that kind of same level where you're like, yeah, I'm ready to kill these guys.
Yeah,
and Heimdall is just like, yeah, I'm ready to kill this dude.
He's the dude that I'm here to kill, actually.
Yeah, and I'm impressed with like how much they held back on, because that was another thing going into Ragnarok where I was like, are we just gonna do the thing where we just like we're killing all of the major gods like one after another, like again? Like I feel like that's almost antithetical to what the story has become and stuff. And I like that, kind of similar to 2018 as a whole, of like how much 2018 held back in terms of lore and meeting gods and stuff. This game really held back on like how many gods you're actually killing, and it is really just it's Heimdall, it's Thor, and it's Odin, and it's not even really Thor.
Yeah, you don't kill
it's
Thor.
Heimdall and Odin kills Thor,
and that's like a great thing too. Like when Kratos kills Heimdall, and he like talks to him, habits and old ways, and I don't recognize who I am anymore. And it's just like, well, A, thank you for going to a friend that you trust, Kratos.
Yeah,
that's character growth, and we're all here for you, and we're proud of you. But B, just like I love that dilemma of him of like, obviously, this is the right thing to do because these people are the worst, but he knows what consequences feel and look like. He watched Greece fall, right after Poseidon died, the plague after Hera died.
Yeah.
It's like all these things that he casually threw these corpses aside, and he knows like the weight of that. So like appreciating all of these things, all these little moments, and him getting to Thor. Mimir's like, "You're good, right? You know what to do." And he's like, "I know, I'm in control."
Yeah.
And he very much is like, "I'm not going to kill you. No matter what happens here, I'll kill you." That makes that fight so much more compelling. And that makes Thor so much more compelling. And I knew Odin was going to kill us. He would. But like, I was just so...
that was especially because it was like, in just one conversation, and it's earned too, right? Because beforehand, Thor and Thrud are talking, and she's upset because he's gotten back into drinking and stuff, and that becomes like a whole thing. And he talks about just doing whatever he wants because it just seems like fun. And he is very much like Baldur. Thor does feel like an older version of Kratos, and I love in just like one conversation it's told of like, you promised your daughter something, and she seems like a great person, and there must be a part of you that made her a great person, and we got to be better. And another thing I'll shout out is I feel like the be better line was kind of thrown out maybe like 2 times too many in like those last like 4 hours, where I was
Sure.
like, all right, like I felt like there was a good amount of usage in 2018 where it didn't feel like too much, but because the last like 4 hours feels so condensed of plot and just like emotional narrative stuff. I feel like because the be better is kind of like the main theme throughout both games, they had to like kind of use it in a lot of places, and so there was a moment where I was like, all right, I feel like I've heard this maybe like 5 times in the last like 4 hours, and so
Yeah, I only remember it, like the only time I remember it being Atreus says it back to Kratos.
which is a phenomenal scene.
Great
That
moment.
I love mirrored scenes, especially because when he in the shot where he's telling him be better, it's the same exact angle and shot that they do in 2018, but it's Kratos over the shoulder looking at Atreus, and they both say, and in 2018, they both do the "I'm sorry" line, and that I loved. That was a moment where I was like, yes,
Yeah, it's the only time I
this is what I
remember.
needed.
So,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, and
fair.
then the the Thor stuff at the very end, I really loved. Yeah, of course, Odin has to be Odin. One thing I also want to shout out is just like, hey, we're gonna kill a pet in the first 10 minutes of this game. Have fun.
Pretty
It's like,
brutal.
yeah, that was a really fun way to enjoy like midnight in my bedroom with my wife and my dog sleeping like 5 feet away from me, and I'm just like crying looking at my sleeping dog, and I'm just like,
me,
I I
me to
I
my
can't.
cat, like laying
Yeah,
on
like
me.
I
I'm like
can't
holding.
deal with this yet. And then like how that also comes back and how emotional it is when he brings Fenrir back as like as like he takes over Garm's like body and like makes it Fenrir, and they find him in like the hole, and he comes out and it's him again. And he's like a
Yeah.
little puppy, and you're like, God fucking damn it, I
It's
can't
like, why would you
I
hurt me
can't
twice
handle
like
this.
this?
Yeah, and when it comes to epic boss fights, I also really enjoyed that whole sequence with yeah, because I loved the whole we're gonna do it because also thematically, right, we're gonna do it my way, we're gonna kill this thing, because you tried to talk it down, your way was dumb, we're gonna do it my way, and you think you killed it, and you're walking away, and it's like, no, now it's turning into a running sequence because now it's alive again. It's like, oh shit. And so yeah, that was all fantastic.
Yeah, good use of Helheim too, because I was like
Yes.
not looking forward to going back there, but they made
Yeah,
it fun.
2018, like I was just like, this is definitely the least interesting place to go.
Yeah,
And I
obviously, like,
still feel the same with Ragnarok, but
yeah, the moments where you can get like Zeus shadow over Kratos, like that makes it. But
yeah.
it's like like otherwise, like I'm not super stoked about running around here for a bunch. Made it frenetic and fun and fast.
Mhm.
But yeah, also like just really shout out to the bosses. I
Yes.
was pretty disappointed with the boss 2018, but Heathog was a great fight. Super,
So cool.
so crazy. Like Freya, like cutting the back into the so good. The like multiple god fights. I thought the opening fight with Thor was incredible. Like
Yeah.
that spoke to me more than the stranger fight. Although I did like that a lot at the time.
Mhm.
It's just like you basically fire and ice, but later.
Yeah.
And that kind of sullies it a little bit for me. Whereas just like all the goat stuff that's happening with Thor felt like such a Thor fight, especially with
Yeah,
everything you
and
know
I
about his
loved
character.
Yeah, and even from Kratos' side, like what you were talking about earlier, of just like the way that you're using every piece of the deer, right? Where like Kratos throws in his face of like, you even bring Modi up last in death, and it's like, God damn, we're talking about this right now.
So, because Kratos
we're
was
30
pissed
minutes
about
into this.
that.
Yeah,
you know, like he
and you
saw
felt that too.
and he was pissed because he's a dad. He's like, "You're a bad dad," and I'm gonna talk shit, and I'm like, "Yes, let's go." We got a model fucking father line here is just very, very good.
And it's crazy. And again, maybe to its detriment, a little bit of just like how dense this game does get. Of just like in any other game, the Thor Jormungandr moment where he sends Jormungandr back in time would have been like this big moment. And it just kind of happens in the background before the Thor boss fight. And you're like, all right, cool. And like, I loved the little thing where Kratos is like, he looks different, and Atreus is like, I'll explain it later. It's him, but it's not the one almost kind of thing. It's I loved how chaotic that moment felt because you're in the middle of like this all-out war sequence. So, but I was kind of like, but they don't get to talk about it later because Atreus left. Yeah. So when were they going to talk about it later?
But still good, and it like like we said earlier, like the Jormungandr stuff, I could have just used a little bit more explicit statements along the way, but it was cool how it worked out. It wasn't the focus, but
one of my last things, or last big things, if there's anything else that possibly you remember that I don't, that left me wanting, but I know is probably for the betterment of the story, is like the big thing that Odin is obsessed with, right? Obviously knowledge, trying to avoid Ragnarok and stuff, and he thinks the answer is this like crack that he's found. And I'm gonna be honest, I really wanted to know what was inside that crack.
Here's the I'm with you.
I think it's better for the story. I'm like, for Trace's character especially, where he also kind of gets seduced by Odin's want for knowledge, because Atreus is he's in that. Even when he was a kid, he was naturally very curious, but now that is a part of his personality of just like being interested in knowing things, and that being a part of his person, and that part kind of like, even though he says he's playing Odin, he is to a certain extent, there is still a part of him that's like interested in this. And I know for the betterment of his character arc, I love that he smashes the mask there, but I was like, I kind of wanted to see if like, maybe we get a peek into other mythologies in there or whatever, like the center of all of these mythologies, right? I thought that was like endlessly fascinating, and
I thought it was going to release a giant monster that would kill Odin, and then Atreus and Kratos would have to fight it. And then it would kill Kratos, and it would be the final consequence of it.
Oh,
that's what I thought for a long time. But I'll tell you, and I'm with you because I wanted to know. And I thought it was a good hook of like this kind of mystery. The answer to life, and it's also like interesting because
it's the golden like glow from the box from, what is that movie? I'm blanking on it. It's the Tarantino movie, but I'm blanking on it. But it's just like it's the mystery. You're never gonna know what's inside it, but you just know that it's supposed to be like that.
Yeah, it's the fact that the whole story is about consequences, right? Inadvertent or otherwise. And it's true also, like, we have watched God stuff. Like, we watched Poseidon get his eyes gouged out, and he didn't show up in Hades, right? Like, he wasn't there with everybody else, And we see a lot of people down there, so we know he's definitely not there. So we know in this world, like, when a god dies, it's not like they're not going to go to the Valhalla.
Their own exactly.
They're not going to go to hell in this world as well. And so there is like a kind of established significance of like Odin, what happens for a god after death, and that like reinforces his death for sure. But it is like Kratos always saying like shit like this always has a cost, shortcuts always have a price, and Atreus making the choice not is like, to me, as significant a choice. Hey, like, maybe I was wrong.
Yeah.
It is like, and the fact that they happen next to each other, I know, very good. Like, I was
It's
wrong.
so
I'm
good,
sorry.
especially because like Atreus brings that up earlier in the game when he first meets Angrboda, where he's like, "Oh yeah, my dad taught me to, close your heart to it." And he says that to himself on his own too, where he's like, "Close your heart to it, close your heart to it," and then it pays off with that. And I was like, "Fuck yes," because that was such a bad parenting moment.
Yeah.
And like so many people call back to that. Like I love that moment.
Yeah, because
It's a bad parenting moment, but so many people I feel like
Kratos, is
yes. Yeah, and so many people call it that 2018 moment. It's like being this like cool, yeah, he's a badass. Close your heart to killing others and stuff like that. It's like you're failing to see the message here.
Yeah, the story that we've been on is that Kratos was the villain,
Yep.
and becoming the hero, right?
Mhm.
And that's like the message, right? So like, if Kratos can do that, then Atreus can, right? Like,
Yeah.
and it is so significant that they both get there, because that's, I think, the reason that they're both standing. Like,
Mhm.
that is, they changed fate by changing themselves, and that's the so good. It's like, oh
It's
man,
so good.
they got me.
Yeah. Even just talking about it right now, I'm like, God damn. What a phenomenal game.
Yeah.
That like it's gonna be hard to not replay all the time.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be like, and it's gonna be one of those things that's gonna be hard. So it's like maybe playing them both back to back. Because again, like I was saying at the beginning of this, like I feel to me it's one game now.
Yeah.
That like that's what it is in my mind. It's like again, like Last of Us Part 1 is Last of Us Part 1. Last of Us Part 2 is that game. 2018 and Ragnarok feel like one game to me now because it is one whole complete story that builds on itself, and it's just a phenomenal thing. Oh, the one thing I wanted to shout out, just because we talked about it in the non-spoiler section, that I felt was like way too quick of like, all right, we're so late in the game here. If this was in 2018, this would have been its own like hour and a half sequence, is the Surtur stuff.
Yes. Yeah. I knew
where it was like,
I also assumed correctly
I was
what
like,
you were talking about.
this is like on the second playthrough, it worked for me more because I knew where it was going, and he is such a minor character. But because like his performance and he just looks cool, and I love like that story is fascinating with like him and the other giant that they separated, and because they don't want to also become victims of prophecy like everybody else in this game. I was like, man, this is so cool. I want him to be part of the crew. I want him to come back to Sindri's house and have breakfast with everybody, because that's just another moment that just happens in this game. You just have breakfast with all your dude bros, and it's fucking awesome. And I wanted Surtur to be part of that gang, and it was like, all right, well, it's not gonna happen, and you're just gonna hang out with him for like maybe 15 minutes. And I was like, all right, fine, whatever. But but it does end in the cool dual Valkyrie fight in the middle of weird Norse space or whatever.
Yeah,
like I was like realms. I was like, this is actually really cool. Visually, like one of the coolest things in the game, I think.
Yeah, totally. The only other thing I think I would want, and I get it with I was like, roll on his character. I really like didn't know what his vibe was. I like that he grabbed the swords. He's like, primordial fire in here. I know where that comes from.
And this is the other thing, is like when he was like, now has my fire, I was like, oh sick, we're getting a cool upgrade with the chains. And it's like, nah,
it's fine.
It's like,
it's still hot.
All right. It's like a different hot,
Yeah.
It's not a a gas oven. Now it's a different kind of.
Now it's an electric stovetop.
Yeah, now it's like
So,
all right, cool.
Different kind of hot.
Yep.
Yeah, Freya, I just, I could say all the good things in the world. Arc. I loved it. I don't remember that actress equally as incredible.
I just saw her as well. We were watching some comfort shows, and I forget that she's in Parks and Rec for like
really?
an episode. Yeah,
Cool.
it's really funny to see of like, oh wow, it's that's Freya now.
Yeah.
And I love that, and it's one of those things when she was introduced. It was like at that point where I was like, okay, I think maybe this is making out of this alive, but now I don't know if like Atreus dies. If she dies, I was like, who's going to be the companion at the end of this? And I love that
I was I just want to say I was 100% certain for 80% of this game, Kratos would still die, would be
Uh-huh.
playing as Atreus with Freya as your companion, and you would
Yeah.
it would unlock like a new skill tree. He had his own on all of his weapons, and I was so convinced, like to the point where I was almost disappointed that didn't happen. Just full like
Yeah.
John
I
Marston style,
I loved it thematically though, because I
yeah, it
love
worked.
because it's like, another thing like the Loki goes, Atreus stays moment. Fucking beautiful. That hug is just another tearjerker of a moment of, his son will always be in his heart, but he still gets to go on and be his own person. But I love that it's the adults that stay behind, and it's like, all right, we got to fix this. And it's the complete inverse of where Kratos leaves the Greek mythology in God of War 3, right? Where he runs away from it, he destroys everything and, kind of leaves the rebuilding of that mythology in Greece essentially to the mortals, right? Because he does leave hope behind because he had hope inside of him this entire time. He's like, all right, I'm gonna give it back to the people. I'm not giving it to my sister or whatever. Yeah, Athena. Um, so now like the rest of this game is us like fixing Norse mythology, just building it without Odin. And I was like, this is fucking awesome, and I love that that's where we're going with this for the rest of the game, past the main story. Yeah, that's just, and that's where I leave the question, because to me, Kratos' story is done in my head, where it's like his character is complete. Do they go anywhere else after this?
I don't know. Make a God of Tricks video game
Yeah.
where you play as
Why? But
Atreus.
it's like Trix, and it's somehow like Atreus also turns into the Trix bunny, the Trix rabbit. Yeah.
Absolutely, 100% intended as that. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's in like a almost Uncharted 4 kind of way. Like they they probably have one more story to tell with Kratos.
Mm-hmm.
And it's tough, right? Like you spent a whole franchise making him the villain. Then you spend the reboot, remake, reimagining sequel of that franchise, redeeming him into a hero that deserves to.
Yeah. So like, where do you go from there at that point?
Yeah,
And
it feels almost wasteful to not at least have a story
yeah,
himself now. Right? He is this
right.
character who has been able to face and overcome his demons and change for the better.
Because
Um,
I would love to see the aftermath of him fixing up the Norse realms and like all of that stuff. It kind of in the similar way where I love that Ragnarok treats, like, you did everything in 2018. Like you did the Valkyrie. Like even if you didn't as a player, like they treat it
yeah,
as
it's
like,
canon.
yeah, we everything you were supposed to do in that game or that you could have done is canon. Those were actually done by this point in time, and I would love to see that similarly in a follow up, where you kind of get to see the good deeds live on, from what Kratos has done, with Freya, with Mimir. I was this was another morning car ride, talk with Greg, where I was like, I would love for it to be that they wanted to wrap up the Norse mythology in two, because the final story that they want to tell is not just in one other mythology. There's the whole thread that's left off with Loki wanting to go find other giants, but we're not entirely sure where those giants are. So like, I'm like, are they about to do like a mythology jumping game where Kratos hears of, word of a trickster god who can shapeshift and stuff, maybe being in trouble in a different mythology, and him having to kind of go through a bunch of different ones, to save him and see if his son is okay. That's the only way where I'm like, maybe that's where they go with it. Probably not, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I will say I am more satisfied with Ragnarok as a game in the year of our Lord 2022.
Jeez. Yeah.
Lord knows we. This game feels like it ends, and if it never happens again, like at least it went out
No,
on
yeah, I'm
top,
totally
right?
fine with
Like
that. Yeah.
I like that, and I think that's where they want it to, because it gives you the opportunity to surprises people like did.
Mhm.
Um, that's exciting. Just I don't know if I would care as much about an Atreus game without Kratos, right?
Right.
But you could also do the thing where like in an Atreus game, Kratos coming back is like the Blades of Chaos moment.
Yeah,
Like,
the big moment.
so like there's plenty of opportunity, and maybe like you play a game where Kratos is like the companion.
Mm-hmm.
That would be cool.
God, that'd be weird.
That'd be
That'd be
super weird.
Cool, but weird. Yeah, I just wanted to throw that question out. I'm looking at all the footage that I've captured over the weeks, and I just wanted a quick shout out to the Norns. I loved that scene.
Yeah,
Shout
I
out
want to
the
bring up that
Norns.
too. That's such a great. I just replayed God of War 2. Very different fates, let's say.
Yes.
Where it's horny and not as interesting.
Yeah.
And like I like that they talk about how like those fates manipulate as opposed to like interpreting it, and these just see and interpret it.
Yeah, like they don't have any power or control over it. Yeah, I loved that conversation where Kratos was like, maybe there's or when he talks about his fates, and Mimir and Freyr are like, that's fucked up.
Yeah.
Like that's like, not cool. And it's like, yeah, like they took that a little too far. And it's like,
Kratos is like, why do you think I killed all of them? Yeah, totally. And like
it felt like it was a weird moment in a God of War game where it felt like a Disney movie almost when you meet the Norns, where you're like, this is some weird like 1980s like Disney shit where they're like,
so cool.
The young one is like saying everything that they're saying, while the other two, like the two older ones, are just like calling them out on their shit. It was so cool. And then also shout out to the squirrel friend. I forget who what his name was.
Played by Sungwon Cho. So good.
Fucking awesome.
So good.
What's with him playing adorable little creatures this year? He also voices the cat in Neon White, and he was very good in that as well. He was really fun, and also another character did not feel like a God of War character. Felt like a kind of like a Disney interpretation of a character, but it still worked, and it still
totally
fit in that war.
Especially like when he starts getting to his breaking point and starts saying some bad words. It's like,
oh yeah,
very good.
Where he said, he's like, hey, you freed Garm, and now the realms are tearing each other apart. I need you to go fix that right now, and don't fuck it up.
Yeah, so good, so good. And yeah, I was just so happy to have like more Sungwon Cho in video games.
Yes, he's fantastic.
Just last kind of like major story thing I want to focus on. Yeah, going back to Freya and her journey. The scene where she is like getting herself back, becoming whole again, extremely powerful. The side quests that you can do in that chunk of the game where her Odin got married.
Yes.
And find the sword that like he had like blessed. And like she can't remove it at first because she's been onto this stuff. And then she can because with Kratos just had therapy together. Important to talk to the people you love. And that the payoff with all that, and just like the payoff with her and Freyr, the payoffs with her and Atreus, like mother was right, you think I was like, God damn, that was a great line to pull out. But yeah, I also think like just the female characters were written very well. I felt the female writing presence that Santa Monica has stacked up there. I thought Thrud was actually
and
I was like really surprised at how I enjoyed her character, especially like how she interacts with Thor, how she interacts with Sif just as a whole, who's great, who doesn't get a lot of screen time, but like,
and it is also the actress who plays Elena from Uncharted.
Yeah.
And that was also like when I first heard her like speak, I was like, oh my God, it's Elena.
I didn't recognize her until I saw her in the credits.
Yeah. It was specific because like the first time you meet her, she's like speaking angrily, and I got the chills of like, oh God, Elena's mad at Nate right now. And yeah, like even just like the little bits of like even when you can like walk into her in Thor's bedroom, and like he's like, hey, like she'd make a great Valkyrie, and she's like, the fuck, dude, get out of my
Yeah.
room. Like, what do you know? But I also like, I love the self-awareness from her as well, where, you know, the reason why she didn't want Thru to be a Valkyrie was just not for Odin, you know, like
Yeah.
that's not who you should be a warrior for. You should be a warrior for yourself. And that realization at the end of Ragnarok, where she walks around, because I was like, fuck, are we about to have to fight Sif as like Atreus right now? Like, is that another boss fight that we're about to do? But I love that it wasn't that. That was fantastic. Like, even though it was a very little bit, and I personally think we could have used more mother-daughter kind of moment.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, and there's like a great post game moment with Prude as well. That pays off stuff that like sets her character up in a way of like gives her the completion to it. She didn't even need to have, but she did.
Right.
And it's like, what a great character, what a great like foil for Atreus. And I was very impressed. I feel like they finally had a God of War game. Not to say like most of Freya, obviously.
Right.
But yeah, I very impressed. Like to so thoroughly turn me around on a game. But like I was hopeful, right? Like I was excited about Ragnarok, that last trailer they put out. I agree with that. Really great trailer, really hype.
Yeah.
I don't know where we're going or how we're gonna get there, or I have an idea of where we're going. I have no idea.
Right.
So I came into this game again like ready to give it another shot. I'm so happy to be on that other side of like, okay, I'm like really into it. Feels like they earned that. From me, who was skeptical, from everyone that also really enjoyed.
Yeah, it was already sold, and it was just more of just like more payoff of what we were already sold on. Yeah, it's a beautiful game, and like I said earlier, it's gonna be hard to not play these like yearly back to back, just to kind of go back and kind of restudy things and restudy moments and relive moments. And yeah, I can't wait to get back to it. I think for my winter break, I'll probably, that'll be possibly the time where I go and explore the end game stuff and try to go for the platinum.
Yeah.
And have all those fun hard fights with the sword hilt. I've done 2 of those, and they're really fun. They feel like the Valkyrie equivalent without just doing the Valkyries again. And
yeah,
I love that they also talk shit to you, and it's just fun little stuff like that.
Yeah, it's great. And
great.
A lot of them are different. Sometimes with them, like you have to fight 2 people at the same time. Also, it's very stressful. Sometimes
also, shout out to those Draugr fights that come out of the holes, and they're really hard. And I was like, God damn. I was like, man, I feel like this was like a personal attack from the person who like hated hearing that 2018 barely had any enemy variety, because they were like, hey, I made Draugrs and they're cool as hell. Now I'm going to make them super hard. I'm going to make super hard versions of the Draugr. And you're like, fine, Jesus, all right.
At least they're the only ones that explode. As opposed to like that just being a mechanic that Draugrs can do halfway through 2018.
Yeah.
These are the only ones that blow up when you get.
Yeah.
Yeah, very just great stuff and great side quests and a full RPG package. I saw the idea of like 2018 felt like a proof of concept for Ragnarok on some level, and I think I'm with that. Just on the everything that you can play Ragnarok and it can feel like more 2018 to you, but I think if you peel the layer back, like you start to realize how much they both from a writing side and from a mechanical side especially, and what they brought to Ragnarok. Such a much more do stuff and side quests, get around so much faster. I got the platinum Ragnarok.
$20.18.
31. And it turns out there's one in every secret chamber. That checked my list off pretty quickly, as it turned out.
Yep. That was a helpful one for when I was trying to find all the Valkyries. Where I was like, oh, there's definitely one one in every single one. That's fun. And I shout out to the Ravens in this one as well, because I felt like in my first initial playthrough, which will be the save that I go back to for the platinum, I actually, for fun back end stuff, I did a second playthrough to capture footage for our spoiler cast, and I made a new account on my PS5, so I didn't have to mess with my my save file at all on my personal account. So yeah, that'll be what I go back to. And by the end of that first playthrough, I think I only had like 11 Ravens left, and that was with like doing like roughly 4 to 5 hours of side quest content. Where I was like, oh wow, they actually kind of sprinkled these into the main story. I think way better than the 2018 game did.
Yeah, and there's less, and the game is much bigger.
Yes.
There might only be 3 less, but it counts.
Yeah, it does.
Cool. Well, this has been delightful, Barrett.
Yeah.
It's nice to talk about God of War with me when I'm not super.
I'm trying to think. I've definitely listened to you. I don't know if I've ever done a show with you talking about 2018, but I love
just talked in the real.
Yeah, in real life. No, I love when we have differing opinions. I hated this entire spoiler cast that we just did because we're both really in love with this game. No, but I love it either way, just because I love picking your brain about any sort of media, whether both of us like it, only one of us likes it, both of us hate it, kind of thing. Just because you think about things in a very in-depth way that I appreciate, and helps me think about things from different angles, and also helps me sometimes reinforce the angle I originally had things. So it's always lovely talking to you about art in the video game variety.
And we're both as goddamn suckers.
Oh yeah.
And that always will bring. But yeah, so obviously you mentioned here, but where can folks find you? Where are you out there? What's your hive? Drop your hive.
So yeah, you can find me on in the last days of Twitter at SadBoyBarrett. I'm on Hive at Barrett Courtney. If you're wondering, like, whoa, why didn't you just do like brand recognition across everything and get SadBoyBarrett? It's because I've actually been trying to get at Barrett Courtney on Twitter for like 3 years. But for whatever reason, Twitter just does not want to delete this one account that has not tweeted in 10 years that has has at Barrett Courtney. That was obviously even 10 years ago, like a bot account or whatever. They still refuse to delete it, so that's fun. So yeah, I'm at Barrett Courtney on Hive. You can follow me there. Oh, my dog Lulu just got a bath, so she's rolling around in the bed because she is looking to get dry. You can find me there. You can also find me making content over on youtube.com/kindoffunnygames. I direct all of our video game podcast content. So I'm the guy switching the 1s and 2s, pulling up B-roll, making sure audio sounds as okay as it can for PS I Love You, the Kind of Funny Xcast, Kind of Funny Games Cast, Kind of Funny Games Daily, so on and so forth. And every once in a while I make videos for that channel, like the Kratos, Can Kratos Be Better video, God of War retrospective. I'll have a few more video essays out within the next year for sure. Over on Patreon, we got fundraised, and one of our stretch goals was me doing 4 types of those videos. So I'm on the books to do 3 more video essay type content. So you can look forward to that soon. You can also check out Assassin's Creed in review, Zelda in review, the Arkham Files, which is a little bit more similar to the God of War stuff, where we just kind of more deep dive into the story and kind of themes of the Batman Arkham games. But if you just want to kind of classic, like, review a game and rank it, check out Zelda and Assassin's Creed in review if you want super in-depth 4-hour videos on the video game franchise.
They're so good that they're very in-depth.
Thank you.
Like
they're the most
like
they're the most Barrett Courtney content I've ever made, and I don't know if I'll ever get that in-depth ever again, because making both of those was just absolutely maddening. But yeah. I love doing it. So
a labor of love.
It's a labor of love, and I'll definitely do similar stuff in the future. But just I have, my friends holding me back a little bit, being like, hey, maybe you don't do a 4-hour video. Maybe you do like a 30-minute video, and it can just be just as good. You just got to figure out the fat to trim, So, yeah. You can find me over there. And if in case anybody who has come over here who has not checked out Irrational Passions before, because I'll definitely share this on the Hive for sure and on Twitter. Alex, who are you? What is Irrational Passions? What do you guys do here?
Yeah, so I mean, this is one of our review discussions. You can talk about, hopefully, Shovel Knight Dig. Me and Jerry Green talking about Shovel Knight Dig. And you can check out, we have a monthly Nintendo podcast that I'm on, A Trip to Nintendo Land with Mike Burgess. You can check out every other week. Scott White does RPG University, an RPG, tons of guests on, myself included sometimes, and irrationalpassion.com. Right now, I'd say those are the big things. We do video previews called Viewpoints. That's good. Check out the one we did about Pokemon, because it's very long and we had a lot to say about it.
I'm excited to listen to that one. And yeah, just to give some context, if you don't know, Alex O'Neill and I met in the early days of Kind of Funny, both as best friends. And Alex was I believe one of the very first friends that I made in the community, and he has become a longtime friend. And of course, we have not seen each other in person in a long time, and I miss him. And this the first. Yeah, and like even just like doing making content together, it's been the first time in almost 3 years, because the last time I was on something over here, I think, was the Persona 5 Royal spoiler cast that I did. I believe maybe I think I did an RPG University for Final Fantasy 7 as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's yeah. I just shout out to Alex. I love you.
I love you too, man.
So just as an introduction, in case people are jumping in here, and we're like, why is Barrett on this
nobody's podcast?
No, not a nobody. You're a very good friend, but just in case, just because I know, new people always come in and find me and are like, oh, what are you doing over here? So just in case,
hanging out. I have a small cameo.
You do. You are the guest speaker on the Arkham City episode of Arkham Files, and that was purely because it was very coincidental, because in that Persona 5 Royal spoiler cast, you and I just kind of hung out and talked after we recorded that, and we talked about the Arkham games. And when I started writing those scripts, I was like, oh, we talked about this, and like I need him to like kind of talk about it in his own voice. So yeah, shout out to that.
That was very cool. I claim to fame. Cool. That is it. Thank you so much for listening. We appreciate you. Go follow Barrett. He's the best. And we'll see you next time.